Chapter 8:23. For this alone, the beginning city had paid 800,000 taels of silver. Such a huge figure was not something that other forces could afford. This move quickly stabilized the situation in the city, and the people in the city quickly felt grateful. Many people knelt down and kowtowed in the direction of the young residents in the city the moment they received the silver. The families of all the soldiers who had died received pensions. The complaints in the city disappeared, and there was a smile on people's faces. However, this was not all of Yang Qindong's means. Next, he announced that the award ceremony for the soldiers who had made meritorious contributions would be held in 3 days. At that time, the soldiers who had made meritorious contributions in this battle would be promoted in official positions and actual material rewards. As soon as the news came out, the people in the city were in an uproar. Didn't they lose the battle? How could there be rewards? It seemed that the scale was not small. What on earth was going on? Those who couldn't figure it out began to look forward to the so-called award ceremony that would be held 3 days later. Scattering gold and silver was Yang Qindong's contingency measure after he returned to the beginning city. Money might not be able to buy sincerity, but it could stabilize people's hearts and stimulate them. If it was supplemented by great benefits, it would definitely have an unimaginable effect. During these 3 days, Yang Qindong did not accompany his wives. He only instructed the teachers and students of the Yang Family Academy to walk around the city and take a look. He spent all his time on stabilizing the morale of the army. For example, he went to patrol the barracks, chatted with the soldiers to understand their psychological thoughts and movements, went to the hospital to visit the soldiers who were injured because of the battle, went to the homes of the people to comfort the families of the martyrs who had died, and so on. These actions allowed Yang Qindong to quickly gain the morale of the army and the public. The uneasiness in the city because of the defeat was almost suppressed by him alone. In the blink of an eye, the 3rd day arrived. Early in the morning, the largest square in the beginning city was surging with people. Under the strict protection of the army, the award ceremony began. Just like before, the 2 carriages of shining silver tails were pushed to the center of the square. Yang Qindong once again put on his commander's uniform and walked up to the podium. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, names were read out one by one from his mouth. The young Mongolian men in brand new military uniforms stepped onto the podium and personally received the war hero medals from Yang Qindong, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Xiaofeng, Windchaser, Lu Zhua, Su He, and Xian Honghai. They also received the military rank that only military officers could wear. They also received the heavy silver tray that made them bend down. In front of Yang Qindong, the young Mongolian man, Batu, stood. In this battle, he joined the battle as a recruit. In the raging fire, he was not only not afraid, but also fought bravely with the cavalry of Mabe. He killed 2 enemies and rescued the injured battalion commander of the 1st Battalion, Deng Yu, at the critical moment. It could be said that he was one of the few people who performed very well on the battlefield. When Batu's deeds were reported to Yang Qindong, he felt that there was something to be done in this matter. Finally, under his support and decision, he became a typical example among the recruits and stood on the podium of the award ceremony. Yang Qindong personally hung a 2nd-level war hero medal on his chest. At the same time, he also gave him a 2nd lieutenant's military rank with 1 bar and 500 taels of silver as a substantial reward. Holding the tray in his hand, Batu's face was red, and his face was full of smiles. "Do well, I am optimistic about you." Like many leaders in later generations, Yang Qindong patted Batu's shoulder to encourage him. It was these 7 words that made Batu extremely excited. Until he walked past Yang Qindong and came to the podium that was equipped with loudspeakers and batteries. His face was still red and excited. "Hello everyone. My name is Batu. I am a native Mongolian. I grew up in a happy family. My father, mother, and sister accompanied me as I grew up. At that time, the sky was so blue and the water was so fertile. Even when it snowed in winter, the snowflakes were so pure and white. But all this happiness was disrupted by a sudden incident. That day, Farwala bandits came to my house. My father, Batu, was still talking about his strength on the podium. Yang Chendong and the others had already taken their seats in the first row of the podium. Sitting on his right was Beta Persei. Yang Chendong had already read the investigation about Ba Tuesday. He knew that he would be Beta Persei's future brother-in-law, so he took this opportunity to give him a chance. Now, it seemed that this person's performance was not bad. Seeing Beta Persei looking at him, Yang Chendong said softly, "Not bad. He did very well. Thank you, young master, for your praise and for giving him this opportunity." Beta Persei was also very excited. Then he looked at Ba Tu, who was still on the podium, with a gratified expression. Although he and Kikij spent 2 days and 2 nights teaching him, it was undeniable that what he said was the truth, and it was also the most infectious for other Mongolians with similar experiences. To be able to achieve this effect, everything was enough. Beta Persei was not the only one who spoke. 2 other Mongolian soldiers who had made contributions in this battle also spoke. Their experiences were different, but the goal of the topic was the same. It was about the benefits of joining the mercenary army, and how their lives had changed after joining the army, and what kind of tempering their lives had been through. Hearing this, the people in the city who came to participate in this award ceremony were either excited, or had tears in their eyes, or... This was a successful conference. After all the processes were completed, the last item of the conference was announced by Tiger's man. Just before the end of the conference, he announced the recruitment of new soldiers in the city, and it immediately received strong support from the people who attended the conference. Previously, Yang Chendong did not advocate the recruitment of soldiers because the resources in the city were limited. It was very expensive to raise an army, not to mention that the treatment of the mercenary army was so good. But in this battle, the losses were too great, so there were a lot of vacancies. Thus, there was a need to recruit soldiers. At the same time, this was also a way to tie everyone's interests together. Think about it, when every family had a mercenary recruit, wouldn't everyone's safety be tied together? It was really a case of, if one's glory is glory, then one's glory is glory, and if one's loss is also loss. A total of 1 to 200,000 taels of silver had been spent, and dozens of soldiers had been promoted to platoon leaders and deputy platoon leaders. This was the best example. Under the double temptation of money and glory, the new recruits' registration area in the city was immediately overcrowded. In the 4 months that Yang Chendong was not around, the total population of the beginning city had increased from the original 50,000 people to nearly 70,000 people. Among them, there were a total of 15,000 young men. However, it was still very easy to recruit 6,000 new soldiers from these people. As for the other sources of soldiers that were lacking, they would have to think about the logistics team. The logistics team was not only responsible for managing logistics. There were 2 very special units. One was the construction team, and the other was the prisoner camp. Their population alone had exceeded 10,000 people. They were all made up of prisoners who were captured in the war. The former was the reserve troops of the mercenary army that had surrendered, while the latter had not completed the transformation and had not completely surrendered. Choose 6,000 people from the construction team to reorganize into the army. Choose another 6,000 people from the prisoner camp to enter the construction team and continue the transformation. Tell them that as long as they perform well, they may be able to become a member of the mercenary army. If they don't perform well, they will work for the rest of their lives. Since Yang Chendong had spoken as the nominal leader of the logistics team, he took over this task and began to adjust. It had only been a few days since they returned to the beginning city, and the losses of the army from the previous battle had been replenished. Perhaps their combat power was not as strong as the previous mercenary veterans, but at least in terms of numbers, they had reached the same level as before. Even in terms of morale, there was not much difference. Seize the time to train. Let the new veterans get used to each other as soon as possible and meet the requirements of being able to go to the battlefield. After leaving these words to Tiger's Mane and the others, Yang Chendong left the barracks outside the city and returned to the Yang Mansion in the city. In the Yang Mansion, the director of the beginning City Security Bureau, Feng Liang, and the captain of the Langya Special Forces, Tai Hu, had been waiting here for a long time. As soon as they saw Yang Chendong coming back, the aura of the 2 people who were originally straight changed. They restrained their sharpness and lowered their noble heads. "You guys are here. Tell me, how is the investigation going?" Yang Chendong nodded to the two of them. Then, accompanied by his servant, Yang Si, he entered the side hall and sat down in front of the chair. Yang Si's body was very strong. He seemed to be seriously injured that day, but it was caused by excessive bleeding. Once he woke up after the blood transfusion, he quickly became lively again. Although his injuries were not completely healed, as long as he did not fight with the enemy for too long, there would not be any problems. After this incident, Yang Si admired Yang Chendong even more. He already knew that at the most critical moment, it was the young master who had transfused his blood to him. This was an extremely touching thing. The ancients were not like the modern people. They had received less education, and they knew even less about some things. In the eyes of many of them, blood was something that could save one's life. How could they casually give it to others? But the young master had done this. How noble was he? How lowly was he? Was it worth it for the young master to do this? He still remembered that after waking up, Yang Si was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He thought that it was his fault that the young master had transfused his blood to him. Later on, the doctor, Yuan Heping, explained a lot of things to him and said that human blood could be produced by themselves. As long as he did not bleed excessively, he could slowly recover. But from then on, he became even more loyal to Yang Chendong. Chapter 8:24. Yang Si stood beside Yang Chendong, less than 2 meters away. This was to ensure that no matter what danger occurred, he could step forward at the first moment and use his body as a meat shield to protect the young master's safety. Yang Chendong sat down and his eyes fell on Feng Liang and Tai Hu. As soon as he returned to the first city, he sent these two people out with only one purpose: to inquire about the actual situation of Wanda City and why the fire suddenly broke out in this battle. The explosion was easy to understand. Gunpowder could do it. And this kind of thing was not an exclusive secret. Baiming knew it, Nanming knew it, and the Mongolian tribe naturally knew it. However, it was winter now, and there was snow everywhere. Yang Chendong could not figure out how the fire started. Feng Liang took the lead in reporting, "Sixth young master, we spent money to bribe a middle-level Mongolian tribe member, and know these names, Agar Dorji and Fan Yuhai. In the last battle, our opponents were not only the Mongolian tribe of Mabe, but also these two enemies. However, the middle-level Mongolian tribe member did not know the exact number of their troops. He still needs time to investigate." After saying this, Feng Liang lowered his head. In this battle, the intelligence department did not follow up. Speaking of which, the Security Bureau was also responsible for the defeat. Originally, they thought that they could make up for their mistakes. However, it was obvious that Fan Yuhai had long been prepared for this. He actually said that he had 40,000 troops. At least, that was what the middle-level Mongolian man who was bribed said. Feng Liang was not a fool. Naturally, he would not believe it easily, let alone report this result. Therefore, he would rather be criticized than to find out the truth. When he heard the name Agar Dorji, especially Fan Yuhai, Yang Chendong, who was originally sitting there, could not help but frown. He had never thought that these people would mingle together. He knew that Agar Dorji wanted his son to marry Princess Tuya and wanted to form a marriage alliance with the Mongol tribe in the north of the desert. Logically speaking, the two sides should be enemies. But now, in order to deal with him, they had joined forces. It had to be said that there were no eternal enemies in this world, only eternal benefits. As for Fan Yuhai, this person was also an old enemy and belonged to the slippery kind. He did not expect that after fighting in the south, they would now meet in the north. It was really like the old saying, "Enemies do not meet." A thought flashed through his mind. He remembered these two people. Since he didn't know their actual situation, he shouldn't act rashly for the time being. He turned his gaze to Tai Hu. He had asked this person to investigate how the fire had started. "Sixth young master, Tai Hu is incompetent. We have not gotten the results yet, but it should be soon. We have more or less figured out the terrain of Wandu. Next, we only need an opportunity to figure out the cause." Tai Hu, who had his head lowered, had a guilty look on his face. He always boasted in front of Yang Qindong. In his words, there was nothing in the world that their Wolf Fang special forces could not do. But now, the task had been handed in to him for 4 days. But there was still no clear result. He was ashamed. Well, then I will give you a few more days. I don't want to drag this matter on for too long. You can do as you see fit. Yang Qindong did not blame them. The current Wandu was not the same as before. There were many Mongolian cavalry stationed there. It was not easy to inquire about information there without being discovered. But he had confidence in the Security Bureau and Wolf Fang. These were 2 incomparably powerful fists. As long as there was enough time, they would definitely send back the results. Feng Liang and Tai Hu left. Just from the way the 2 of them went out, it was obvious that they were holding back a lot of energy. It was conceivable that the next time they came to report, there would definitely be a result. Just as the 2 of them left, 3 women came in hand. They were the 2nd Madame Qiao Yin, the 4th Madame Lady Xiang, and the 7th Sister Yang Duo. It had been 3 days since they came to the first city. They had gradually become accustomed to the environment here, especially the greenhouse plantation outside the city. It was their favorite place to go. Not only was there green grass that was different from the winter snow, but the vegetables there were also the freshest. They were picked and made into delicious food. The taste was very good. The 3 of them came hand in hand this time to invite Yang Qindong to the greenhouse plantation. It was not that they were insensible. On the contrary, they wanted to use this method to persuade Yang Qindong to rest more. Otherwise, no matter how good his body was, he would still be exhausted. The 3 women's hospitality was difficult to decline. The main reason was that Yang Qindong had not spent much time with them. He owed them too much. In the face of such a request, he naturally could not refuse. He immediately said, "Then, I won't do anything today. I will accompany you to pick vegetables. We will make delicious food." Ha ha ha. Yang Qindong treated it as a hands-off shopkeeper, but the others were not so lucky. For example, the city lord, Yu Mian, was currently taking Wang Si, Yuan Heping, and the other teachers and students of the Yang Family Academy to tour the city and choose the location to build the school. Most of the first batch of students of the Yang Family Academy were now working in the First University of Red City. Every year, many outstanding students would graduate from there to fill the various positions that appeared in the expanding Yangxia. Building the second university in the first city was something that Yang Qinjiang approved after careful consideration. With the idea of cultivating backup forces, he thought that there should also be a university in the first city. Needless to say, the principal of the second university must be Wang Si. He asked Yu Mian to accompany him to choose an address. Once winter was completely over and it was time to break ground, a university would rise from the ground. Only when he came to the first city did Wang Si see Yang Qindong's great talent and great vision. How was this still a city? This was clearly the future prototype of a country. He remembered that before leaving the capital, his grandfather had told him that the strength of the Duke of Loyalty should be far stronger than what outsiders saw. At that time, he did not believe it, but now the facts were in front of him, and he had no choice but to believe it. It was precisely because of this that Wang Si did not have any doubts. On the contrary, he was very excited. He knew that he had encountered a good era and an opportunity to let go of his hands and feet. Compared to the Ming dynasty that was already dull, decadent, tyrannical, and even filled with internal strife, everything here was so clear and attractive. The Ming dynasty advocated Confucianism and paid attention to the path of the sage. It seemed that as long as one could write a good essay, one could become a pillar of the country. In the past, Wang Si had also thought this way, and he had even done so. However, ever since he came into contact with the Yang family, which could be called a new learning, his attitude had completely changed. Originally, the knowledge in the world was not only limited to Confucianism. There were many more things that were worth learning and exploring. Knowledge was endless, and there was no end to learning. Ever since he fell in love with Yang Shui, Wang Si had completely thrown himself into it, and what appeared in front of him was another world. Now that he was able to leave the capital and come to the origin city, it was equivalent to providing the Yang family with a strong enough soil. In addition, Yang Chendong rarely used people based on seniority. He had always used talents in a different way, and this made Wang Si even more excited. He knew that the greatest opportunity in his life had come. As long as he could seize it, he would become someone like his grandfather, or even someone more powerful than his grandfather. For this goal, Wang Si worked hard and did his best. The first step was to choose the location of the school. Both Yu Mian and Wang Si were serious people. When they came together, they were naturally very careful in choosing the location of the school. Fortunately, there were too many open spaces in the origin city, and there were too many places to choose from. After just one day, the new location of the school was decided. Then, it was reported to Yang Chendong for approval. What kind of courses would be held in the new school, and who would be the preacher were the problems that the future principal, Wang Si, would have to consider after all. Finally, there was a chance to show off their skills. This was a good thing for most of the students of the Yang Family Academy. In the future, they would not be confined by various rules. They only needed to follow their own thoughts and work hard to complete it step by step. If their performance was outstanding, there should be no problem with a golden path for them to walk on. One had to know that their teacher was loyal and courageous. With this, how could the students be afraid that they would not have a future? Of course, not every student was so excited. Just like Junko, one of the few female students, she was very conflicted at this moment. She left Baiming with the team. Along the way, she saw the different customs and environment of the Great Ming Dynasty. It let her know how vast the real Great Ming Dynasty was. It also let her know that her country was so small and weak. As soon as she arrived at the origin city, a new feeling once again refreshed her worldview and outlook on life. Although many of the people living here were not rich, their faces were full of happiness from the bottom of their hearts. Although some of them had just lost their loved ones because of the defeat, this did not break them down. On the contrary, many people thought that the reason why they lost the battle was because there was no god of war to command the battle. Now that the god of war had returned, they would still restore their history of winning every battle. Their future life would only be better. This kind of yearning for the future, as well as a positive and optimistic attitude, was very infectious even when Junko walked on the street. In contrast, her country, including her father and those ministers, only knew how to fight for fame and fortune in a small place. But in fact, how many people really cared about the lives of the people? Chapter 8:25. Everyone else was seeking change, and they were all getting better and better with each passing day. Where should Japan go from here? As a member of the royal family and a princess, Junko had to have some ideas. But at the same time, a choice was placed in front of her. Should she return to Japan now or stay here to learn more? Walking out of the capital of Baiming, Junko knew that she was safe. Here, Yang Chendong was the sky and the earth. As long as there was no order from him, no one would restrict her actions. That was to say, from the moment she stepped into the city, she had gained complete freedom and the right to choose. If she stayed, she should be able to learn more. She could see how the academy developed from nothing, how it grew, and how it combined what she learned with reality to benefit the country and the people. Could be said that this was a very good learning process. Once he learned it, one day when he returned to Japan, if he learned from it, he should be able to shake Japan, bring a new wind there, and strengthen himself. But would reality give her so much time? Junko asked Yang Chendong and knew that the advanced artillery that her father wanted had been passed to Japan. That was to say, the battle between the royal family and the general might start at any time. If that was the case, how could she still have the heart to stay here? She wanted to go back and help her father. Junko was troubled by whether to leave or stay for several days. But in the end, the honor of the country prevailed over everything. She finally made the decision to leave. As for whether she would lose the best opportunity to learn after doing so, she really couldn't care less. Junko came to the Yang mansion and said goodbye to Yang Chendong. She was received in the study. The study was an important place in the Yang mansion. Usually, even the two madams were not allowed to come here without permission. Just like when they were in the Yang manor, this was already an iron law. Generally, those who could be received in the study were important people. Junko was surprised to see Yang Chendong here. But thinking that she was going to leave, she didn't have so many thoughts in her heart. Yang Chendong was sitting at the desk, writing something. Feeling Junko's entry, he said without raising his head, "Wait a little longer. It will be done soon." Yes. Over the past 2 years, Junko had already gotten used to Yang Chendong's orders. She involuntarily complied and sat down on the chair placed in front of her. Then, she sized up the study room. This was the first time she had entered this place. She saw many books on the bookshelves. Just by looking at the names, she could tell that many of them were not available outside. This could be seen from the gorgeous book covers. Yang Chendong didn't have to wait for long. He stopped writing, stretched, and turned to look at Junko. For a moment, their eyes met. Today, Junko seemed to have dressed up and put on some light makeup. Her skin looked very clean, and her face was also very clean. Coupled with her delicate facial features, she gave people a very comfortable and pleasant feeling. "Have you made your decision?" His eyes only stayed on Junko's face for a moment, then moved to her eyes and asked, "Yes." Facing such a gaze, even a somewhat burning one, Junko didn't know why she was a little nervous. She just answered and quickly lowered her head. Yang Chendong said generously, "If you want to leave, then leave. This is my promise to you. You don't have to be so evasive. You don't owe me anything. By the way, I just wrote something. If you really want to go back to Japan and build an academy, it may be of help." He actually wrote something for me? Doesn't that mean he has me in his heart? At this moment, Junko's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. It would be a lie to say that she didn't have any feelings for Yang Chendong. Just like how beauties loved heroes, this seemed to have become a common problem. No matter how strong a woman's heart was, she would always hope to find a stronger man to rely on and rely on. Not to mention that Yang Chendong was young and handsome, giving people the feeling that he was omnipotent. How many girls could resist such a man? Once upon a time, Junko's heart was filled with Yang Chendong's figure. She even made up her mind that as long as Yang Chendong asked, she would stay and accompany him forever. Even though she knew that Yang Chendong already had 5 wives, she still took the initiative to ignore this layer. Even if she was a country's princess and couldn't marry as a concubine, she still threw these fetters aside. Unfortunately, from the beginning to the end, Yang Chendong didn't take the initiative to ask her to stay. At most, he gave her a choice. This feeling finally made Junko give up the beautiful dream in her heart. She decided to leave. But now, when Yang Chendong's somewhat burning eyes looked at her, she found that her determination was still not enough. Her heart couldn't help but have other thoughts. "Thank you." After a long time, Junko finally opened her mouth. At this time, after a struggle in her heart, she finally made the decision to leave here. Compared with her feelings, as a princess of Japan, she was more worried about her father's foundation. This might be a kind of mission of being born in the imperial family. "You're welcome. You're my student." Yang Chendong smiled. He might not have noticed the change in Junko, or he might have noticed it, but he didn't want to say anything about it. "Yes, I'm his student." Junko suddenly smiled at this moment, then raised her head and looked at Yang Chendong, revealing a bright smile. "Thank you for taking care of me for so long. If possible, on behalf of my father, I welcome you to Japan. At that time, I'm willing to be your guide." "Definitely." Yang Chendong smiled. He had to go to Japan, but when that day came, he was afraid that not many people would sincerely welcome him. By the way, a battalion of soldiers will go out of the city the day after tomorrow. They will go to the sea town in the newer Gandusi area to receive the goods shipped from the sea. You can leave with them. Those soldiers will protect your safety along the way. "Thank you." After thanking him again, Junko didn't know why, but her heart seemed to be empty, as if something had dissipated. This made Junko, who was holding a stack of documents, walk out of the Yang mansion with a stunned expression on her face. Until she stepped out of the Yang mansion's gate, tears flowed down her face. She thought that maybe she would never see him again in the future. But what she didn't know was that they would meet again soon. It was just that, at that time, it would be in a different way. Yang Chendong didn't show any discomfort with Junko's departure. This woman was very beautiful and smart. For a certain period of time, she really touched his heart, and he even had the idea of marrying her as a concubine. But his own ideals and mission made him not say those words. Even though he clearly knew that even if he asked her to stay now, there was still a high chance of success, he still didn't do that. She has her own mission after all. I just hope that she can be safe. When we meet again one day, maybe everything will come naturally. After sighing in his heart, Yang Chendong shook his head and temporarily put Junko's matter aside to consider the situation in Start City. The weather had begun to warm up, and the ice and snow also showed signs of melting. Once the grass began to grow again, spring would come for the tribes on the grassland. The newly grown water plants would be very beautiful, which was also the favorite and happiest time of the nights. Of course, it was also the time when war broke out. How to seize this opportunity to expand the influence of Start City and expand their territory in such a season became a practical problem in front of the mercenaries. Well, the necessary preparations are necessary, but before that, we still have to deal with the enemies in Wanda City first. This is not only for revenge. Such a large-scale enemy will not be allowed to exist near Start City. Yang Chendong was determined to occupy Wanda City. Previously, General Mu Run was there and he cooperated with him. Of course, he couldn't attack directly. But now that it was changed to someone else, there was no psychological burden to occupy that place. What he lacked now was some understanding of the situation there. And this understanding was finally sent to Yang Chendong the next day. The ones who came to report were Feng Liang and Tai Hu. They knew very well what the sixth young master needed now. After the last report, the two began to work hard to infiltrate Wanda City. There were advantages of the coalition forces. For example, the force would be larger when they were together. The number of troops would be larger, and the combat power would be enhanced. But at the same time, there were many disadvantages, such as the chaos in management. Everyone served their own masters, and no one looked down on each other. It was precisely using this idea and gold and silver to pave the way. Soon, the Security Bureau bribed 2 middle-level generals and repeatedly verified from their mouths to get what they wanted. The first to report was Feng Liang, sixth young master. The situation in Wanda City has been figured out. The enemy's strength is nearly 60,000 people. Among them, there are about 28,000 people from the Mongolian tribe in Mabe, 15,000 people under Agar Dorji, and 15,000 people under Fan Yuhai. In the Battle of Wanda City, the mercenaries were ambushed and suffered heavy losses. But in that harsh environment, they still killed nearly 2,000 people and launched a counterattack before they died. From this point of view, the intelligence of the Security Bureau was very accurate. Sixth young master, our people have successfully infiltrated the city. We finally found out that the thing that caused the fire was crude oil. Oh, it's this thing. Tai Hu took out a porcelain bottle from his bosom. It was filled with crude oil that he had obtained from the city. Chapter 8:26. Crude oil. Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows and reached out to take the porcelain bottle. After opening it and smelling it, he nodded involuntarily. He had read about the so-called crude oil in some books before. This thing should be said to have been recorded as early as the Han Dynasty. It came out of the ground and was now known as crude oil. It was just that the people of this era did not know how to mine it or how to use it, so there were very few opportunities for it to be used in the military. Presumably, even the crude oil that caused the fire last time should have come out of the ground. It was the kind that could be easily obtained and used by the Mongolian army. If this was the case, then the combustion must be very strong. Everything was logical. So it's this thing. Have you found out where they got it from? Yang Chendong, who had more knowledge about crude oil, asked curiously. I've figured it out. This thing appeared in the low-lying area between Wanda City and Guangwu Town. Our people also went there to take a look. Although most of the crude oil has disappeared, if we look carefully, we can still find some. Tai Hu replied with his chest puffed out. It could be seen that this time they really put in a lot of effort and investigated everything very clearly. Is there still this kind of crude oil in Wanda City? Yang Chendong asked a question that he was very concerned about. I don't know yet, but please give us some time. We will definitely investigate it clearly. Tai Hu shook his head lightly and then asked for orders with a determined expression. It had only been 5 days since he had returned to the Holy Land. It wasn't easy to figure out the situation in such a short time. However, it was still impossible to fully understand the situation in Wanda City. Yang Qindong naturally understood this. He also knew that time was a little short, but he could not wait any longer. The mercenaries gave people the feeling that they were invincible and invincible. This was the reason why they were able to grow so quickly. On the other hand, if he lost again and again, no matter how much money he took out, there was no way he could restore the morale of his men. Of course, there was another more important reason. This time, someone had taken advantage of his absence to slap the mercenaries. If he did not return the favor, it would be hard to avoid rumors that would shake the morale of the army and would be looked down upon by the other forces. This was the main reason why Yang Qindong was so anxious to mobilize his troops. Be it the fact that the Mongol Alliance army had heavily injured the mercenaries or the fact that they were occupying the city and not leaving, it was a provocation. If he didn't show any reaction after a long time, who would take the mercenaries seriously in the future? Wouldn't the various legends that had been created in the past all be for naught? This was something he absolutely would not allow. However, in such a short period of time, he had made up his mind to fight because of the news delivered by Feng Liang and Tai Hu. Now that he knew the exact number of enemies in Wanda City and knew that there was a very flammable crude oil in the city, this was an opportunity placed in front of him. Yang Qindong was very good at grasping opportunities, and this time would be no exception. Pass down the order. All divisions and regimental commanders are to come to the Yang residence for a meeting immediately. Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a bright light, and a bold plan had begun to form in his mind. After the 6th young master's order was passed down to the various battalions, the officers above the regimental level immediately rushed to the Yang residence. Soon, in the war room of the residence, all the officers stood there. They all puffed out their chests and looked at Yang Qindong, who was standing in front of the sand table with a calm and composed look. When all the regimental officers were present, Yang Qindong moved his gaze away from the sand table. At this moment, all the officers above the regimental level in the beginning city's military camp stood in front of him. They were the Independent Division Commander Tiger's Mane and Deputy Division Commander Xian Honghai, the regimental commander of the Fierce Tiger Regiment, Xiaofeng, renamed by Yang Qindong himself, the regimental commander of the 1st Cavalry Regiment, Zhue Feng, and the regimental commander of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Lu Zhua, the regimental commander of the 1st Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Su He, and the regimental commander of the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Shibi, the regimental commander of the Logistics Regiment, Beta Persei, and the battalion commander of the Reconnaissance Battalion, Su Yunsheng, enjoyed regimental treatment. That's right, Shibi was the first regimental officer to be promoted on the front line. Unlike the others, even Tiger's Mane and Xiaofeng, who was standing there, were people who had climbed up step by step. However, Shibi had indeed been directly promoted to the position of regimental commander from among the fallen generals. Before this person could be said to be unknown, but now, he was known to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Shibi's ability and wisdom were only known by Yang Qindong, who had the deepest contact with him. This person even had the same ideas as Yang Qindong when it came to matters. He was originally a general in the Tatar army, and he was half Han Chinese. Yang Qindong naturally had to put such a person in an important position. Naturally, there were some disagreements about Shibi becoming the regimental commander of the newly established 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, but this was the order of the war god, and no one dared to openly question it. Yang Qindong believed even more that as long as he gave the other party a chance to perform, it wouldn't take long for everyone to see his strength clearly. At that time, no one would have any doubts about Shibi's appointment. His gaze swept across every single one of them. At this moment, every single one of them had their chests puffed out, revealing a pair of tiger-like eyes, perfectly displaying their best mental state at this moment. Today, I called you all here for only one thing, and that is to attack Wanda City. There was no opening speech, not even any words to boost the morale of the soldiers. This was because Yang Chundong knew that everyone had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Sure enough, in the next moment, everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and excitement. For example, Tiger's mane and the others' faces were filled with killing intent. They had been waiting for this bloody humiliation for a long time. Very good. From your state, I can see that you all should be prepared. Since that's the case, I believe that there shouldn't be any problems. Now, I will announce the military order. In the war room, Yang Chundong issued orders one after another. The officers who were called by name stood at attention and promised to complete the mission. A large net targeted at Wanda City was unfolded. In a sense, now was not a good time to launch an attack on Wanda City. First of all, the organization of the regiments was not complete. Take the Tiger Regiment, for example. Because they had to send a battalion the day after tomorrow to transport military supplies, their regiment should have 3,200 people after expansion, but now they only had 1,100 people. There was also the newly established 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment. They should have 3,200 people, but now they only had 2,000 people, which caused a lack of military strength. Secondly, even with the existing army, there were still the 6,000 recruits that had just been recruited, as well as the thousands of veterans from the construction team who had not yet fully adapted to the mercenary army style. Logically speaking, they should first unify the army and train them well before sending them to the battlefield. But in this way, it would take at least a month or two for them to complete their training, or even longer. Yang Chundong could not wait any longer. He did not dare to think about what the other grassland tribes would do if he could not display the powerful combat power of the mercenary army in a short period of time. He was afraid that at that time, he would not only have to deal with the 58,000 people of the Mo Bay coalition army, but also more. He could not wait. Moreover, sending troops now could also have an unexpected effect. Yang Chundong believed that they had a 60% chance of winning this battle. If they also had advanced weapons and were prepared in advance, this battle could be won. A series of orders were issued. All the officers did not doubt him. Although they knew that they were lacking in various aspects, this was the order of the god of war. They had to obey. From the fact that the god of war could not win without a battle, they also firmly believed that this time the victory would belong to them. The officers accepted the order and left one by one. In the end, except for Beta Persei, everyone left. Then the tall but cheeky Beta Persei came in front of Yang Chundong. "Young master, let's make a deal. Don't let our logistics team stay at home. I want to fight too." "No." Yang Chundong's expression became much more serious. "Beta Persei, don't think that your logistics team's task this time is very light. Let me tell you, once the war changes, the safety of the entire beginning city will be in your hands." "Oh." Beta Persei was rejected and said listlessly. Beta Persei did not believe that the sixth young master would make a mistake. He was clearly comforting him. Yang Chundong seemed to have seen through Beta Persei's thoughts and shook his head. It was always difficult for him to harden his heart in front of the people closest to him. "Well, don't have any psychological burden. If we win this battle, do you know how many captives there will be? When the time comes, your logistics team will be busy. As for how to screen out useful talents from these captives to join the mercenary army, that will be your business. This matter is of great importance." Beta Persei's expression became much more serious when he said this. The number of people in the logistics team was not fixed. It might only be a few thousand people at a time, and it might reach more than 10,000 people at a time. All of this depended on the performance of the soldiers on the battlefield ahead and how many captives they could capture. How to make use of these captives was indeed a very important matter. In other words, the logistics team's function was not only to cook for the soldiers, provide various weapons and logistical support. At the same time, they also had the role of fresh troops and replenishment troops. Once a good seedling appeared and it was discovered that several regimental commanders were fighting over a captive, the distribution of the captives would eventually fall on him. This was a very popular job. Of course, this was also a very important job. Only the most trusted people would be placed in this position. Chapter 8:27. As soon as he thought of the sixth young master's trust in him, The grievance in Beta Persei's heart disappeared. Yes, young master. I completely obey your orders. You can rest assured that the logistics regiment will not let you down. But I can arrange for a deputy commander to guard the city for this battle. I can also follow you, young master, into battle. No. Yang Qindong once again rejected Beta Persei. This time, all the generals in the city who can fight have been sent out. You're the only one left. You can't leave. Otherwise, if something really goes wrong, it will be a big deal. Oh, I'll obey your orders. Seeing how resolute Yang Qindong was, Beta Persei also knew the principle of going too far and not going too far. There were some things that he could ask for instructions once, but he absolutely could not ask for instructions a second time. The battle meeting was over, and the barracks outside the first city began to quietly mobilize. In order to ensure that their military intentions were not known by the other party, all the members of the reconnaissance battalion were dispatched and sealed off 20 miles around the first city to ensure that no enemy scouts could approach here and spy on any changes in the mercenaries. Then, after a full day and night of preparation, on the second night, the divisions and regiments acted according to the plan. In the middle of the night, a large number of cavalry rushed out of the barracks and went straight to the city 200 miles away. Other than their own weapons, the cavalry did not bring anything else. Even the food on their bodies was only 5 days of dry rations, in order to ensure that their speed was faster. As a result, in the night, on the snowy ground, black shadows could be seen running quickly. In the season where the snow had begun to melt, the cavalry did not have to worry about falling into the snow when running, allowing them to exert their fastest speed. It was often said that a horse could travel 1,000 miles in a day and 800 miles in a night. That was unrealistic. Perhaps there were extremely special war horses that could do it, but this did not mean that it was possible. However, if they were to set off as soon as the sky turned dark, it would take them nearly 12 hours to reach dawn the next day. Traveling light and without any heavy supplies, it was still possible for them to cover 200 li in one night. When dawn broke, a large number of mercenaries with 5-starred flags suddenly appeared 20 li outside of Wanda City. They formed a fan-shaped encirclement, blocking the front and flanks. When the scout in charge of scouting outside the city saw this, he hurriedly returned to the city to report. When the cavalrymen in the city received the news, they immediately became restless. Only a small portion of the 50 to 80,000 cavalrymen had not been defeated by the mercenaries. Most of them had been defeated more than once. Suddenly, a large army of mercenaries appeared without any warning. It was easy to imagine how panicked they were at this moment. It wasn't just the soldiers. Even Agadorji and Hararok, who had received the news, got up from their beds in a panic. They put on their clothes and rushed to the commander's residence in the city. By the time the father and son arrived, Sudra Khan was already seated in the hall, but his complexion wasn't good. It was obvious that he was frightened by the sudden news. What should we do? The mercenaries suddenly besieged the city. What should we do? Agadorji didn't wait for his butt to sit on the chair and began to ask Sud for a plan. It was obvious that he was really panicking this time. Back then, he had nearly 50,000 cavalrymen, but they were still defeated by the mercenaries. Now, the entire Allied army only had a little more than 50,000 soldiers, and most of them were captured captives. Compared to the elites that he had brought, Agadorji didn't think that the Allied army would have any advantage in this battle. Don't worry. Let's wait for General Fan. Seward was annoyed by the questions and pointed to the empty chair on the right. He really didn't have any ideas now. In his opinion, since the mercenaries took the initiative to attack, they must be prepared. He really didn't have any good ideas on how to deal with the enemy. He could only wait for Fan Yuhai to appear and see if he had any ideas on how to deal with the enemy. Agadorji noticed that Fan Yuhai hadn't arrived yet. His face couldn't help but sink. He coldly snorted and said, "What time is it now? Why isn't General Fan here yet? What is he doing? What is he doing? I'm afraid he still hasn't gotten up from that woman's belly last night." Haha. Hararok cooperated with his father. Then, a wretched expression appeared on his face. It was as if he had fallen into some kind of imagination. Sud helplessly shook his head when he saw the strange expressions of the father and son. As far as he knew, Fan Yuhai wasn't into this. At least during the time they were together, he didn't hear that Fan Yuhai had such a hobby. However, the mercenaries had already appeared outside the city. It was indeed strange that he hadn't appeared yet. The wait was always long. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Fan Yuhai, who was clad in armor, finally arrived. When he stepped into the hall, Hararaka's mocking voice sounded. "General Fan, you're so busy. I thought you would only appear after the enemy breached Wanda City." Fan Yuhai didn't stop as if he didn't hear the mocking voice. He walked to the chair on the right and nodded to Sud and Agadorji as a greeting. As for Hararak, who didn't even have a seat and had to stand to talk, Fan Yuhai didn't even look at him. It was as if he didn't exist. This time, Hararak was furious. The feeling of being ignored made him angry. He wanted to continue mocking Fan Yuhai, but at this time, Sud said, "General Fan, you know about the mercenaries outside the city, right? Do you have any countermeasures?" "Yes, I know. Just now, I went to the city wall to take a look. It was indeed mercenaries outside the city. Moreover, this time the war god came personally." Fan Yuhai nodded. The reason he came late wasn't because he was lazing in bed, but because he went to the city wall first to understand the situation. Sud nodded in satisfaction when he heard Fan Yuhai say that he understood the situation. This was what a general should do. He wasn't a petty person who only knew how to stand there and mock others. Once on the battlefield, he wouldn't be of any use. It was just that the war was imminent, and this thought only flashed through Suda's mind. When Suda heard that Yang Chundong had also come, he asked in a daze, "War God is also here. Are you sure?" "Yes, the flag that belongs to the war god has been raised. Since he is in the grassland, there's no reason for him to not come out." Fan Yuhai didn't have a telescope, so he couldn't see that far. However, based on his intuition, he believed that this old opponent must be among the mercenaries outside the city. Seeing that Fan Yuhai was so sure, Sud's expression changed again. "Even the war god is here. I think they must be determined to get Huan City. What should we do?" "Of course we fight," Fan Yuhai blurted out as if he was talking about an extremely ordinary thing. Indeed, the mercenaries appeared so quickly. It had only been 7 days since the last defeat. They had made a comeback, which was indeed a bit beyond his expectations. In his opinion, after suffering such a heavy blow, the most important thing to do was to conserve energy and guard against them attacking the beginning city. Why would they take the initiative to attack others? However, the war god was the war god. His actions were always so unexpected. It had to be said that the sudden appearance of the mercenaries also caught Fan Yuhai off guard. Even now, he still couldn't figure out what the war god was thinking. However, not understanding the other party's thoughts didn't affect his decision to fight. "Fight? That's the war god we're talking about. Can we defeat him?" Agadorji opened his mouth, but his words weakened his own morale. It was obvious that he was really afraid of this person. This time, Sud didn't stop Agadorji from saying such words. In fact, how could he not be worried? He had lost 2 battles with the war god. At the worst, he was chased for thousands of miles until he fled to the northwest of the Inma River. All of this was enough to prove his thoughts. Why can't we beat him? The war god is also a human. He will also be injured if he is hit by an arrow. A saber can also take his life. Speaking of which, he is no different from us. Moreover, our military strength is clearly several times greater than the enemy's. In addition, we are in charge of defense while they are in charge of offense. This makes it impossible for the muskets to display their greatest advantage. Fan Yuhai stated his decision and the basis for it. Then his gaze fell on Suda. Obviously, he wanted this person to make the final decision. Sud didn't immediately answer Fan Yuhai's question. Instead, he turned his gaze to Agadorji and asked, "Lord Agadorji, what do you think of this matter?" Agadorji wanted to express his opinion, but Fan Yuhai beat him to it. "Lord Agadorji, we can't hesitate anymore. If we only think of running away because of the appearance of the mercenaries, when will we be able to defeat them? Moreover, in the last battle we have already proven ourselves and proved that the mercenaries are not invincible. If we retreat without fighting this time, I'm afraid that we won't have the chance to win in the future. Are we going to live a life of hiding in the future? Are we going to live like rats in the dark for the rest of our lives? Fan Yuhai had to interrupt. Otherwise, once Agadorji expressed his opinion, there would be no need for this battle. He was afraid that they would really have to retreat. He had long heard that the Mongols ate meat while the Central Plains people ate grass. The grass eaters couldn't beat the meat eaters. However, when he came here, Fan Yuhai realized that the reality was not as he had imagined. Everything was reversed. The once glorious grassland cavalrymen were so scared that their legs turned to jelly when they heard the name of the mercenaries. They were already scared before the battle. Chapter 8:28. Originally, Agar Dorji wanted to call for a retreat. He was truly afraid of Yang Chendong, but now that Fan Yuhai said so, he didn't know what to say. On the other hand, although Suitor was also afraid of Yang Chendong, it wasn't to the point where he would retreat without a fight. Now that he heard Fan Yuhai's words, he pondered for a moment and asked, "How confident are you in this battle, General Fan?" "At least 50%. Fan Yuhai answered quickly this time. Clearly, he already had a plan in mind. He was being conservative. He had already gone to the city wall to take a look. The sudden appearance of the mercenaries did scare some people, but the enemy's strength was limited. From afar, there were only about 10,000 people. If the three sides combined, there would be close to 60,000 people, and all of them were cavalry. In the past, such a force wouldn't be a problem to conquer the southern Ming Empire. But now, with 60,000 people against 10,000, what was there to be afraid of? 50%? Suitor nodded. Then we can fight. How about this? I will hand over the command of my Mongol army to you. I hope you won't betray this Khan's trust. The atmosphere in the hall froze because of this sentence. Agar Dorji raised his head in disbelief and looked at Suitor. Handing over the military power was equivalent to handing over all of his family's lives. Suda was really magnanimous. Thank you so much. Yuhai won't disappoint you. A look of surprise flashed across Fan Yuhai's face, but he quickly recovered. However, when he opened his mouth, the way he addressed Khan had already changed. He only called him Khan and did not mention his name, but it was already a sign of closeness. Good. Suitor seemed to be very happy when he heard the change in the way he addressed Agar Dorji. He wanted to see what Agar Dorji would choose. Agar Dorji didn't seem to hear the conversation at all. He just lowered his head and pondered. It was absolutely impossible for him to hand over his military power. He had never completely trusted a person. Back then, he didn't trust his elder brother Tuachuo Khan. Now, he couldn't even trust his own son Horror, let alone an outsider like Fan Yuhai who came out of nowhere. Agar Dorji didn't say anything. Suitor's face flashed with anger. What? I've already handed over my military power. Are you still not willing to hand over your 15,000 troops? If they wanted to defeat the mercenaries, they had to give it their all. They couldn't afford to have any other people involved. Since that's the case, Yuhai will go out and prepare. Fan Yuhai, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any intention of forcing Agar Dorji. Perhaps he knew that even if he tried to persuade him, Agar Dorji wouldn't hand over his military power. If he went overboard, it would only lead to internal instability. Since that was the case, it was better not to force him. Of course, he dared to make such a decision because he had the determination to defeat the mercenaries after taking over the military power under Sud Khan. So what if he was a war god? Without soldiers, how could he overturn the heavens with his own strength? After Fan Yuhai finished speaking, he didn't wait for anyone else to say anything and turned around resolutely. Sud Khan coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves, and stood up. He didn't even look at Agadorji, leaving the father and son alone in the hall. Father, they've all left. Let's go back too. Dorji saw that there was no point in staying here with his father. He reached out to help his father stand up from the chair. Sigh. It seems like we can't stay here for long. Agar Dorji sighed from the bottom of his heart as he slowly stood up with the help of his son. In the past, he had a good relationship with Fan Yuhai. In fact, Fan Yuhai was even his subordinate. The two of them had joined forces to resist the powerful Sud Khan. But now, Fan Yuhai had obviously been roped in, which caused the situation to change drastically. The previous fairness had been broken. As the weaker party, it was naturally very dangerous to stay here. Now that there was a powerful enemy in front of them, no one would do anything to him. But what if the mercenaries retreated? Then it would be time to clean up the internal affairs. It would also be time for victory and defeat to be decided. Even if he wanted to leave, it wouldn't be so easy. War had always been like this. There was no definite right or wrong. No one would talk about benevolence, righteousness, and morality. Everyone was just trying to strengthen themselves. In order to achieve this goal, everyone might be friends eating meat and drinking wine together today. Tomorrow, they might draw their swords and fight to the death because of benefits. Agadorji's sigh was heard by his son, Halajuo. Halajuo was quite clever, so he suggested, "Father, let's just watch from the sidelines for now. We don't need to worry about who wins or loses. Let's just let them fight until both sides are injured. This will only be beneficial to us." Agar Dorji raised his head with a look of hesitation. Originally, he wanted to send some troops to express his goodwill. But when he heard his son's words, he felt that it was very reasonable. That's right, since they were going to fall out, what benefits would there be if he didn't send troops? At most, he would lose his own troops. In the face of a great enemy, who would dare to do anything to him? Since that was the case, he might as well laugh and watch the wind and rain. Perhaps there would be an opportunity for him. My son is right. How about this? Father is tired and needs to go back and rest. During this time, without my orders, my army cannot move a single soldier. Those who disobey will be executed. Agar Dorji's voice was like a flood, his expression firm. However, after saying this, his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had suddenly aged a lot. Even his steps became unstable. It was as if he really needed a good rest. If such a person didn't become an actor, it would be a waste of his talent. After Fan Yuhai obtained the military power of the Mongol tribe, he immediately gathered all the generals for a military meeting. With Sud Khan at the helm, although the generals had some opinions in their hearts, they did not show it. Instead, they followed the instructions of the meeting and started to send out troops. 2 hours after the mercenaries had surrounded the city, the Mongol army finally reacted. Troops with all sorts of flags came out of the city and formed a huge formation 5 miles in front of the city. Looking from afar, it looked like a sea of black, giving people a feeling that they were endless. In comparison, the 10,000 mercenaries that surrounded the city appeared to be a little weaker. However, when some people felt uneasy, they couldn't help but look at the war god's banner above the main formation. When they saw the more than 100 black riders below the banner, they felt reassured. As long as the war god was here, they wouldn't be afraid of any opponent or enemy. Even if the enemy outnumbered them by a few times, it would still be the same. The war god had such a godly power. Yang Chendong rode on the white dragon horse and stood in the middle of the formation. He used his binoculars to look at the Mongol cavalry coming out of the city. A hint of a smile flashed past his eyes. His gaze then became resolute as he calmly said to the flag-bearer, "Order the entire army to prepare for the enemy's charge. Use guns from afar and arrows from close range. Don't get entangled with the enemy." The flag fluttered high up in the air. After this order was passed down, the independent division and the various regiments followed his orders and made their defensive preparations. The 6-gun battalions of the independent division had already been broken. They were split up in front of the other regiments. Just like that, each regiment only had 1-gun battalion. However, they were split up evenly. This also calmed the hearts of the soldiers, and they would not panic because of the enemy's charge. Outside the city, the Mongol army was gathering. They were constantly moving. To split up all the cavalry within 5 miles of the city was not possible. As such, the first to charge out were Lu Duo and Zamubala. Zamubala was one of Sud Khan's generals, while Lu Duo was a general that Fan Yuhai had personally trained. The two of them each brought 5,000 cavalry and guarded the left and right sides of the army. Within the army, Fan Yuhai's gaze had already landed on the city gates many times. However, he still did not see Agar Dorji's subordinates come out. He could not help but sigh as he said viciously, "Since you want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, don't blame me for settling the score with you after this." At this moment, Fan Yuhai had already developed a killing intent towards Agar Dorji. The two of them were not familiar with each other, and it was only because they wanted to integrate better that Fan Yuhai acted like he was inferior. He even expressed that he was willing to respect Agar Dorji, which was why he joined this alliance. However, right now he had already gained Sud Khan's trust. Since that was the case, the stepping stone from before was no longer of any use, and it did not matter if he threw it to the side or stepped on it again. Although his heart was filled with killing intent, his expression did not change at all. Fan Yuhai raised his head and looked at the mercenaries in green uniforms 5 miles away. He raised his right hand and said, "Sound the drums. The left and right sides send out 1,000 cavalry each to test the waters." Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the drums shook the heavens, and every beat seemed to be able to strike one's heart, causing one's heart to swell with excitement. Under the sound of the drums, 2,000 Mongol cavalry slowly came out from the left and right sides, advancing step by step. Order Captain Windchaser and Captain Su He to send out 1,000 cavalry each to engage the enemy. Tell them that this young master will be watching over them and waiting to give them rewards. Yang Chendong looked at the number of enemy troops and his expression was calm. Since the enemy had only sent out 2,000 cavalry, there was no need for them to use their guns. They would just have a battle of cavalry against cavalry. Chapter 8:29. Yang Chendong knew that this was just a test between the two sides. If he didn't even dare to fight with such a small amount of cavalry, it was inevitable that the morale of the army would be affected. Thinking of all the things that would happen next if the morale of the army was affected now, then it would be even more difficult to handle. Rather than anything else, it was better to fight with the enemy and have a good start. The flag-bearer conveyed Yang Chendong's order. After Zhui Feng and Su He saw the order clearly, they were extremely excited. This was the best opportunity to show off in front of the 6th young master. Usually, this was something that couldn't be obtained even if one begged for it. Now, they finally had the chance to show it off. Immediately, the 2 regimental commanders became the leaders of the vanguard without hesitation. Then, they chose 1,000-strong cavalry warriors. When the enemy was 2 miles away, they also slowly moved forward on their horses. "Comrades, the god of war is looking at us from behind. The opportunity is in front of you. How you want to perform depends on everyone. When you attack later, don't hold back. You have to show the military might of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Do you understand?" While riding forward slowly, Zhui Feng, as the regimental commander, gave everyone a mental preparation. Ba Tu, who had just performed a meritorious service, was in the cavalry regiment and was selected to be in the first 1,000 cavalry camp. He had once saved the life of Deng Yu, a battalion commander, on the battlefield. Because of his bravery, he was chosen by the regimental commander, Zhui Feng, and became the platoon commander of the 1st company. At this time, Ba Tu didn't come alone. He brought a row of soldiers with him. At this time, his heart was surging. He knew that this was the time for him to show off. Thinking about how his family had changed because he had joined the mercenary army, and how he had found his life's work, his eyes were filled with an incomparably resolute fighting spirit. "Comrades, this is our chance to show off. The god of war is looking at us. All our comrades are also looking at us. Our families in the beginning city are also looking at us. Then we can't let them down. In a while, when the battle starts, everyone will charge together with me. With the tip of the arrow, we will charge into the enemy camp. After we kill our way into the enemy's camp, we will follow the 3-3 battle strategy that we usually train in. Everyone will support each other and kill the enemy with ease. Kill them all. A platoon of 29 warriors said in a low voice. However, it was precisely this kind of muffled sound that was able to suppress everyone's killing intent and ensure that when the battle broke out later, they would be able to display astonishing strength. Not only Batu's platoon, but the other dozens of platoons were also secretly accumulating their strength and suppressing their killing intent, waiting for the moment to erupt. Time continued to pass, and the distance between the cavalry of the two armies continued to shrink. When the distance between the two sides was less than 2 miles, the generals of both sides gave the order for the entire army to charge. Charging 1 mile each was the minimum for the cavalry to charge. If they were any closer, they would not be able to display the flying ability of their war horses. Both sides charged at pretty much the same time. The ground trembled at that moment, and the sounds of killing filled the ears of the first cavalry. The distance of 1 mile was completed in a dozen breaths of time. Then there was a flash of blade light and people flew about. Windchaser was at the front. He held a sharp saber and wore a black cape. He was like a black whirlwind as he charged at the front of the 1,000 cavalry. On both sides of his body, there were over 100 riders following him. Under the leadership of this tip of the arrow, they were like a sharp knife, stabbing straight into the enemy's heart. With a move of Windchaser, around 100 meters away from him, tip of the arrow had already formed. They were either made up of 100 men in a company or 30 men in a platoon. They formed into arrows of various sizes, stabbing into the Mongol cavalry that were also charging. Using the speed of the warhorse, the sharpness of the saber, and his exquisite equestrian skills, the moment Windchaser charged into the enemy cavalry, he began to kill them. His arduous training of slashing out 1,000 saber strikes every day had finally paid off. Under the constant slashing of the saber, enemy cavalry after enemy cavalry were chopped off their horses. Their heads flew into the air one after another. Blood splattered into the air, showing the cruelty and cold-bloodedness of the battlefield. Windchaser's figure pierced in like a knife, quickly taking away a few lives. He also made a deep hole in the enemy's cavalry formation, allowing more soldiers to pour in and display their strength. In the next moment, Batu and the others, who were half a beat slower, finally caught up with the enemy. Then they followed suit and charged straight in. When the power of the tip of the arrow reached its maximum limit, the enemy cavalry finally began to fall into chaos. They had only sent out 1,000 cavalry. Logically speaking, they should have gathered all these forces together to form a cohesive formation to charge in. This was the way of cavalry. The facts had already proven that the strength of the cavalry came from the might of their phalanxes, and from their repeated charges. In such an environment, even if one's strength was extraordinary and could kill 1, 10, or even 100, could one fight 1,000 alone? If one could not do it or was slightly disappointed, then it would be time for one's heart to be pierced by 10,000 blades. That was why a cavalry charge was never the time to be a hero. If someone did that, they would be surrounded by 10,000 cavalry. Then, when there were enemies all around them, apart from 10,000 blades piercing through the heart, there was no other outcome. This kind of thinking had already been deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. It was precisely because of this that they were unable to adapt to the mercenaries' sudden change in tactics. They had originally been waiting for their companions to gather around them so that they could form a joint attack. Only now did they realize that they had been defeated one by one. Not only that, but the mercenaries' tip of the arrow was not just a single group. It was divided into more than 10 groups, attacking from different directions. It gave off a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere. The tip of the arrow formation was a cavalry killing formation that Yang Chendong had created himself after summing up the experience of the later generations. Imagining the Sharp Knife Squad, Sharp Knife Platoon, and Sharp Knife Company in the later generations, Yang Chendong thought that he could use this tactic on the battlefield. The so-called Sharp Knife was not the vanguard. The vanguard referred to the team that was the first to receive the enemy and take the lead. However, the Sharp Knife was just like its name. It was a sharp weapon that could pierce deeply into the enemy's heart. It was the kind of weapon that could kill the enemy with one stab. Of course, in order to become the tip of the arrow, there was a very important condition. The person who made the arrow had to be very brave, completely disregarding life and death. Only in this way could he break the enemy's cavalry formation and play the role he was supposed to play. Otherwise, even the tip of the knife would be broken before it entered the enemy's body. Not only would it not be able to display its power, but it would also cause the warriors behind it to become ownerless and eventually be scattered and killed one by one. It was not easy to find the tip of the arrow, at least for most of the Mongolian cavalry. However, this problem was not a big deal in Yang Qindong's eyes. This was because he had a lot of wealth that the grassland people could not compare to, as well as advanced weapons that other armies could not compare to. Ever since he returned to the beginning city this time, he began to advocate the combat method of the tip of the arrow. In order to achieve his goal, he offered very generous conditions. Once he passed the assessment and became the tip of the arrow, he would be able to receive double the reward of his other comrades. Not only that, he would also receive a set of bulletproof vest that protected his upper body to ensure that he could minimize his losses on the battlefield. This bulletproof vest was naturally not as powerful as the one in the big warehouse, nor was it as effective as the bulletproof vest worn by Yang Qindong. It was just a piece of clothing that looked like a horse clip. There were 2 steel plates and a lot of cotton in it. Even so, it was not a problem for it to deal with ordinary swords. With the generous rewards in front of them and the equipment that was enough to protect themselves, there was an endless stream of warriors who signed up to join the assessment of the tip of the arrow. Speaking of which, the people of this era were not afraid of death. They were just afraid that their deaths would not be worth it. Just based on the fact that the mercenary army had an extremely comprehensive pension policy for the dead warriors, especially the dead warriors who had rendered meritorious service, it was already worth many people to risk their lives. Once they died in battle, their families would benefit. There would be many people who would remember their good deeds. It was worth it to come to this world. It was far better than the other Mongolian soldiers. When people died, they died. No one would take a second look at them. Once they did not die and made meritorious service, the generous rewards would come. Not to say that they would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives, but at least they could live a stable life for many years. It was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Yang Qindong had always been very generous to the soldiers who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy. These people were fighting with their lives on the line. Based on this, they should be able to obtain even more. It was precisely because of this generous policy that the mercenary army could often fight 1 against 2, or even 1 against 5 or 1 against 10. Under the stimulation, the tactic of the tip of the arrow was formed. It was the first time it was used on the battlefield. The facts also proved that this method was feasible. You were like the strongest tip of the arrow. Windchaser was the first to charge into the enemy formation. Although he could not avoid being stabbed many times, with the protection of the bulletproof vest, he did not suffer much damage. On the other hand, the enemy was completely stunned by this tactic. When the tip of the arrow charged into their formation, chaos finally appeared. The strength of cavalry lay in their formation. Only then could they form an advantageous charge and cause damage to the enemy. If both sides were cavalrymen, whichever side panicked first would be the first to lose. Chapter 830. The formation could no longer display the strength that it should have. Under the constant barrage of arrows, the Mongol cavalry became scattered soldiers one after another. Without anyone protecting the left and right wings, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Often, before they could even charge out for dozens of meters, blood splattered all over their bodies, and they were either injured or killed. In comparison, the Windchaser cavalry with the tip of the arrows were like nails that had sunk into the enemy camp. They scattered the enemy and killed them one by one. Even if some of the soldiers had temporarily lost contact with their troops, they still had the 3-3 tactic. As long as there were 3 cavalrymen, they would be able to display the might of a small charging formation. Even if there were 10 cavalrymen, they would be able to hold on for a while. If there were too few opponents, then the saber would fall and the person would die. There would be no victory. On the other side, the Tatar cavalry commander Su, he had also become the tip of the arrow. In terms of individual strength, he was not weaker than Windchaser and was even stronger. He led the Tatar cavalry and charged forward. It was as if they had entered a place where no one could stop them. They killed group after group of Mongol cavalry and continued to expand the battle results. Beat the gong to retreat. Fan Yuhai, who was riding on the horse, had a deep gaze. If one looked closely, one could see the shock in his eyes. Seeing that there were not many cavalrymen left and that they did not have the strength to attack anymore, he quickly gave the order to retreat. The Mongol cavalry who were lucky enough to survive on the battlefield felt like they had been pardoned. When they heard the sound of the gong, they quickly retreated from the battlefield. However, even the formation had been broken, so how could it be so easy for them to escape? In the process of retreating, not only did they have to endure the harassment of the mercenaries, but they also had to endure the pain of arrows when they finally managed to kill their way out of the formation. As they retreated, at least 100 cavalrymen were shot by arrows. Their fleeing horses fell to their deaths, dying on the path of hope that they had seen. In the end, less than 500 of the 2,000 cavalrymen that they sent out returned. Furthermore, almost all of them were injured, and their faces were filled with fear. Just this battle alone had broken the morale of some of the soldiers. No one could guarantee that such people would not go all out if they were sent to the battlefield again. In comparison, the Tatar regiment only suffered less than 100 casualties. Most of them were injured, and most of them had minor injuries. After some bandaging, they could quickly return to the battlefield. This was the strength of the mercenary army. Of course, the strength of the tip of the arrow was due to the strength of the formation, and of course it was because most of the people sent this time were veterans and people who were good at fighting. However, the victory was right in front of everyone's eyes, and no one could question it. Fortunately, this was a fighting force formed by veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. Fortunately, there was a certain proportion of new recruits and captive soldiers in the opposing mercenary army. Otherwise, if this battle continued, there would be no hope for them. Zhui Feng and Su He brought their troops back. What welcomed them were the cheers and congratulations of their comrades. For a moment, the two commanders and the soldiers who had followed them to battle all had happy expressions. At this moment, Yang Qindong's voice sounded out from the white dragon horse. Those who have done well in battle will be remembered. When we return, we will reward them greatly. Mighty war god! Mighty war god! Immediately, loud cheers resounded across the land. Not long later, the cheers grew louder and louder. Not only were the veterans cheering, even the new recruits who had just joined the army a few days ago, as well as the captives who had just been transferred from the construction team to the army, were all cheering loudly. At this moment, they were quickly assimilating into the mercenary army. They were experiencing what it meant to share glory and loss. When the shouts reached the other side, the expressions of the Mongol cavalry became very ugly. Before, there were some people who had looked down on the Mongol cavalry because of the Battle of Yendu a few days ago. They thought that the legendary powerful mercenary army was only SOSO. However, after witnessing this scene, they quickly closed their mouths. In comparison, they knew just how lucky and difficult their previous victory was. Of course, there were also quite a few generals who turned to look at Fan Yuhai, who was riding on his horse with an unchanging expression. In the previous battle, it was because they had listened to his suggestion that they were able to heavily injure the mercenary army. Now that the war god had personally appeared, they hoped that their general would be able to come up with a better plan. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change, but great waves had already risen in his heart. He had exchanged blows with Yang Qindong before, both directly and indirectly. However, that was only a battle of infantry. Yang Qindong had relied on his long-range firearms. However, the battle in front of him was completely a head-on clash. They had lost so badly and so quickly, which was out of his expectations. However, a famous general was a famous general. Fan Yuhai would not be discouraged because of a momentary defeat. He looked at the mercenary army on the other side and had a new plan in his heart. In the end, they had too few people. Moreover, the ratio of veterans was too low. This was their weakness. In a small-scale battle, they might be able to rely on this advantage to win, But what about a large-scale battle? Even if the casualty ratio was 1, 2, or even higher, he could still afford it. On the other hand, the mercenary army would not be able to take it. Once that happened, it would be time for him to counterattack. Pass down the order. Send out 5,000 cavalry from each side. Charge. The thought flashed through his mind and turned into words as Fan Yuhai spat them out. When Lu Duo and Zamubala heard this order, they were first stunned. Then they understood what the general meant. They immediately cupped their fists and went to mobilize the cavalry. Sud Khan handed over the command of the battlefield to Fan Yuhai, giving him the authority to mobilize more than 40,000 soldiers. It was just 5,000 men from each side, so it was not a big deal. In just an hour, the cavalry was mobilized. Then, under the leadership of their respective generals, they slowly moved forward. Through the binoculars, Yang Chundong saw everything that the Mongol cavalry were doing. He laughed. Inform everyone to defend. Once the enemy charges into the range of the firearms, there is no need to be polite. If the enemy retreats, the cavalry will charge and use arrows to greet them. Fan Yuhai wanted to use the human wave tactic to exhaust him to death. This was indeed a good move. However, it also depended on whether Yang Chundong was willing to play with him. Since he had the advantage of the firearms, why not use it? Only a fool would engage you in a one-on-one battle. Previously, he had exchanged a move with you just to raise the morale of the troops. Since he had reached his goal, it was time to toy with the enemy. The flag waved. The officers who were waiting to be called out had no choice but to suppress their desire to charge forward and fight a good battle. Instead, they began to quietly watch the performance of the musketeers. Of course, it was not that they did not do anything. Instead, they ordered their soldiers to prepare their bows. The moment the enemy retreated, they would chase after them and beat them down. Within Yundu city, the news of the Mongol army's defeat had spread throughout the city. It was obvious that some people were shocked, while others lowered their heads and shook their heads. Hararuo intentionally walked around the streets, then returned to his father's temporary residence with a face full of excitement. The moment he entered, he shouted, "Father, father, that traitorous Fan Yuhai lost. I knew it. Who does he think he is? How could he be a match for the war god?" In his heart, Halaruo naturally hated Yang Chundong. If not for this person, he might have already become the son-in-law of the Mongol tribe. However, the hatred he had for Fan Yuhai was not small either. Although Fan Yuhai had never said that he was Agar Dorji's subordinate, in the eyes of this father and son pair, they had always thought so. Now that the two enemies were fighting, no matter who won or lost, it was something they were happy to see. In the courtyard, Agar Dorji was basking in the sun. He sat on a chair with a relaxed expression. Although there was a great battle going on outside, Agadorji wasn't worried at all. Even if the sky fell, there would be someone higher to hold it up. On the contrary, he was waiting for Sud Khan to beg him to send troops. When that time came, he would definitely ask for an exorbitant price. Seeing his ugly son yelling and screaming as he entered the courtyard, Agar Dorji shook his head helplessly. His son wasn't very capable, but his temper wasn't small. He really didn't know how his son was going to survive if he wasn't around one day. Halu Ruo seemed to only want to vent his feelings. He didn't insist on his father responding to his shouts. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, he turned and left. "Father, if there's nothing else, I'm going to find some fun. Staying in this courtyard is really annoying." The so-called fun was naturally looking for women. Mu Ren, the original general of the city, had escaped. However, many of the citizens did not escape with him. The previous fire had only burned down the east of the city, and the other 3 cities were not affected. Not only that, some industries did not only survive, but because there were close to 60,000 Mongol cavalry in the city, some industries became even more lively than before. The fun that Halaruo wanted to find was naturally the matter between men and women. He knew that his son was too ugly and had not married yet. In this aspect, Agar Dorji had always allowed him to do as he wished. However, considering that the city wasn't very safe, he still nodded lightly to the guard captain beside him. A group of 10 guards followed him out of the residence. They were going to protect the young master's safety. However, what they did not know was that when Hilarion walked on the streets, behind him and his guards, someone was watching everything closely. Chapter 831. Fan Yuhai rode on his horse and stood outside the city. Before he left, he had already thought about the safety of the city. Hence, he had left his trusted aide, Zhang Meng, by Sud Khan's side to prevent any accidents from happening. As for Agar Dorji and his son, he had only sent people to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing trouble. This pair of father and son did not pique Fan Yuhai's interest, but the 15,000 cavalrymen under his command were something he was determined to obtain. He was even prepared to take over this force at any time. From this, it could be seen that this person had a grand plan. Outside the city, there were 5,000 Mongol cavalry on the left and right. A total of 10,000 Mongol cavalry had attacked. By the time they reached the center of the battlefield, they didn't see any reaction from the mercenaries. They did not send out their cavalry like they did at the start. This made the generals who were leading the cavalry feel confused. However, the beating of the drums did not stop, so their army could not stop. As such, they whipped their horses and charged forward. It was only a distance of 3 miles, but the cavalry charged forward for more than 2 miles. Just when they were 1 mile away from the mercenary camp, gunshots suddenly rang out. Pa-pa-pa. The gunshots did not stop, and the Mongol cavalry at the front fell off their horses like dumplings. 6 battalions, a total of 2,400 musketeers, squatted in front of the mercenary cavalry like a long snake, forming an impenetrable net of fire. Enemies within 500 meters were shot down one by one. The cavalry was very fast, and it should not be easy for the musketeers to hit a fast-moving target. However, there were too many enemies, and it could be described as a dense swarm. With such a formation, even a blind man would have a 90% chance of hitting the enemy. Not to mention, these 6 battalions had been trained for a long time. The gunshots were dense like firecrackers, and the response was that there were Mongol cavalry who fell off their horses at every second. As the numbers accumulated, more and more enemies died on the battlefield. Fan Yuhai, who was standing at the rear, couldn't help but feel heartache when he saw this scene. He knew more about guns than any of the Mongol cavalry generals, and that was why he knew how terrifying they were. Back then, wasn't the mighty Jiaoji kingdom defeated by such firearms? At that time, even the elephant soldiers could not gain the slightest advantage, let alone the charging Mongolian cavalry. The sounds of gunfire continued, and more Mongolian cavaliers died, but they were about to close the distance of 1 mile. At this moment, within the mercenary army, the sound of the bugle of charge rang out. Toot, 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 toot. The loud and clear sound stimulated the adrenaline in the human body, causing every soldier to have the urge to jump on their horses and raise their whips to go on a killing spree. Charge! Tiger's Mane, who was riding on his horse and wearing a white cloak, let out a loud roar. Then, he raised his saber and was the first to rush forward. Now, he urgently needed a great victory to prove himself and wash away the shame of his previous defeat. With Tiger's Mane's shout, the various divisions and regiments all moved. In an instant, over 10,000 cavalry jumped out and swarmed over, shocking the Mongol cavalry. Retreat! Retreat! Seeing that the situation was not good, Fan Yuhai immediately gave the order to retreat. Immediately, the sound of the gong sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry, who did not know what to do, immediately turned around and ran. Their reaction was not slow, especially since Fan Yuhai's order was very timely, so they should be able to retreat safely. However, Yang Chendong had already given the order to make preparations. When Tiger's Man and the others charged, they raised their sabers as a feint. Seeing that the Mongol cavalry wanted to turn around and leave, they all picked up their sabers and chased after the Mongol cavalry and shot at them. The prepared bows and arrows shot out and landed among the Mongol cavalry. With a series of pai-li-pa-la sounds, over 1,000 Mongol cavalry were shot down from their horses, either dead or injured. This chase lasted for 3 miles. Only when they were in front of the enemy and under the city walls did the signal to retreat sound out. Immediately, the 10,000 mercenary cavalry received the order and retreated in an orderly manner. This caused Fan Yuhai, who was waiting for a chance to counterattack, to be disappointed once more. When the mercenary army retreated, there was no chaos at all. It was as if they had rehearsed this a long time ago. Whoever retreated first would stay behind to cover for them. Even if he sent out the cavalry now, he would not be able to gain any benefits. Furthermore, most of the cavalry were still in the city and had not been sent out. Even if he wanted to move them out, he would need time. This was the disadvantage of having a small city. Outside of the city, there was no way they could fit 60,000 troops. This was probably one of the reasons why Yang Chundong dared to bring his troops over to provoke them. The sky slowly darkened. In the second battle, they had not injured the enemy, but they had lost another 3,000 men. Adding everything together, they had lost close to 5,000 men. Retreat, all of you, back into the city. At night, we need to tighten the defense and prevent the enemy from attacking at night. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change as he said to Lu Duo and Kamuba. After that, he rode into the city and headed straight for Sud Khan's residence. When Fan Yuhai saw Sud Khan, he reported everything that had happened today. He was already prepared to be scolded. However, unexpectedly, Sud Khan did not scold him and only nodded. And the losses were not big. Have you figured out the situation of the war god? Fan Yuhai pondered for a moment before replying in a deep voice. It's about time. The other party has too few soldiers. If we really fight, the one who loses will definitely be him. Therefore, he should only be trying to intimidate us. As long as we don't move out, the other party won't be able to take advantage of us and will naturally retreat. Good. Then I'll leave everything to General Fan. Against the war god, being able to defend the city without losing is already a great achievement. After all, this person is too famous. Even if you want to defeat him, it won't be done in a day. Suda actually tried to persuade him instead. Fan Yuhai immediately revealed a very moved expression and said, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." Suda's generosity was partly due to his appreciation of Fan Yuhai's ability. More importantly, the cavalry that died today were not his direct subordinates, nor were they the elites of the Mongolian tribes in Mo Bay. People like them might have been herders yesterday, but today they had become soldiers. There were many people like them in Mo Bay, so the loss of a few would not be a heartache. Fan Yuhai naturally saw this point as well. That was why he sent the cavalry that were not strong to test the enemy. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he did things appropriately. The Mongol army retreated back into the city, and the mercenaries cheered as they set up camp. They even lit up a huge bonfire. Under the light of the fire, be it the veterans, captives, or new recruits, everyone had a victorious smile on their faces. Today's 2 victories gave them great confidence. They were filled with trust towards the war god. They believed that, under the leadership of the war god, victory would belong to them. Outside the central tent, there were many people moving around. 2 guards had switched positions to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. In the tent, Tiger's Mane stood in front of Yang Chundong and flattered him. Or rather, it could be said that he was not flattering, but speaking the truth. "Young master, you're just too amazing. Your formation at the tip of the arrows caused them to not know what to do. Using the musketeers against the cavalry, you used silence to stop them, effectively avoiding all sorts of problems when shooting while moving. If this goes on, before long, we'll be able to take down these Mongolian soldiers and wipe away the shame." Tiger's Mane was still speaking excitedly, as if he was saying something great. However, Yang Chundong suddenly raised his head. "Do you really think that, with our current formation, we can destroy the 60,000 Mongol soldiers in front of us?" "Ah!" Tiger's Mane was stunned by this sudden question. He stood there not knowing what to do. After being stunned for a long time, he did not know how to reply. Fortunately, Yang Chundong did not intend to make things difficult for him. He quickly answered his own question. "The enemy has 60,000 soldiers, and we only have 10,000. Moreover, There are many new soldiers and captives who have not fully adapted to our military rules. Relying on this force to defeat the Mongol army is completely impossible. It was not that it was impossible, but it was completely impossible. Just from this sentence, one could see that Yang Qindong's mind was still very clear. Then, he said, "The only reason we were able to obtain victory today was because the old soldiers and musketeers displayed enough advantages. If the two sides really fought, then the loser would definitely be us. This is impossible." Tiger's Mane said in disbelief. "Nothing is impossible. Tiger's Mane, as a general, the most important thing is to understand the situation and size up the situation. Doing something despite knowing that it is impossible is definitely not something a general of an army should do. It is merely the bravery of an ignorant person." Yang Qindong's expression did not change as he continued to speak in an extremely calm manner. This time, Tiger's Mane's expression changed again and again. He thought back to the defeat last time. It was because he underestimated the enemy and did not fully understand the enemy's situation before sending out his troops. In the end, he caused a huge defeat, causing the strength of the mercenary army to be greatly reduced. The sixth young master had no choice but to personally go into battle. Seeing the sudden change in Hu Mang's expression, Yang Qindong sighed softly in his heart. He spoke up once again. "I have no intention of blaming you. In the previous battle, the army was defeated. Although you, as the main general, have to bear some responsibility, how many of the regiment commanders below you used their brains? They were all blinded by victory and thought that the mercenary army was truly invincible. Did they think that the moment the army appeared, the enemy would flee at the mere sight of it? Humph! They did not think about it. The Mongols have ruled here for so many years. How could they be so easy to deal with? If that was the case, the great Ming dynasty would not have sent out so many times and returned in defeat. Failure is not scary. What is scary is not knowing how you lost. That is a person who cannot be saved. Do you understand?" Chapter 832. Hearing Yang Qindong's words, Tiger's Mane quickly replied, "Yes, young master. We have already summarized our experience. If we don't understand the situation clearly, we won't easily send out troops again. I can promise you this." "Yes." Yang Qindong's expression became a little better. Since they had already lost the previous battle, there was no point in dwelling on this matter. As long as the military commanders had learned their lesson and would not repeat the same mistake, the soldiers who had died in battle would be able to rest in peace. Sometimes losing a battle wasn't scary. On the road to growth, encountering defeat was also a kind of harvest. It was a prerequisite for becoming stronger. As long as the heart didn't lose after a defeat, they could still have the heart to fight again. Moreover, the more they fought, the braver they became. "Okay, you can go first. Take care of your own camp. In the next 2 days, we will only surround and not attack. Facing the enemy's challenge, we may even retreat to make concessions. At that time, the morale of the army cannot be shaken. You can go and discuss with the battalion commanders what to do. Yes, go and call over Zhuai Feng of the 1st Cavalry Regiment." Yang Qindong raised the cup of hot tea in front of him and lightly waved his hand. Tiger's Mane was the first person he met. He definitely wouldn't be the last. He was making preparations for the following arrangements. There were some things he needed to explain to the commanders. Tiger's Mane left. Not long after, Zhuai Feng entered the main tent. After staying for half an hour, he left with his head held high. One by one, the commanders entered the main tent. Every one of them had a private conversation with the 6th young master for half an hour or more. That night, the main tent was lit with oil lamps. It was only when the sun was about to rise that it was extinguished. When the sun rose, the various armies began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals from the chimneys. The fragrance quickly spread everywhere. The army was a scene of bustling activity. 2 hours later, the two armies that had eaten their fill began a new day of confrontation. In front of the city, Fan Yuhai rode out. This time, the cavalry behind him was even larger. From afar, the number of people had already reached 20,000. Facing a mercenary army, especially one that was personally led by a war god, from Fan Yuhai's point of view, even if the entire army moved out, it wouldn't be excessive. The cavalry formed a formation of 1,000 men, and they quickly got into formation. Following Fan Yuhai's shout, 1,000 men charged out of the camp. The one leading them was Zamubala, the valiant general of the Mongol tribe in the north of the Gobi Desert. After Zamubala appeared, he led this 1,000-man team and charged towards the mercenaries. When they were about a kilometer away, he suddenly stopped. Countless experiences and facts had told them that this distance was relatively safe. Zambala, who had stopped his horse, began to challenge the mercenary general. He looked like he wanted to have a one-on-one battle with the mercenary general. 1 versus 1. This kind of battle strategy was used in the ancient times, had been passed since ancient times. This was especially true for cavalry. They paid particular attention to the tightness of the battle formation and the momentum of the charge. With just one man and one general, the effect that they could exert was already very limited. A battle strategy like 1 versus 1 had not appeared in a long time. But today, it appeared in front of two armies. Many people's faces were filled with confusion. Then, some of the generals' faces were filled with excitement. It seemed like this was the time for them to display their individual strength and gain merit. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, had a calm expression. It was as if he didn't see the other party's actions. He didn't move. This caused many people to retract their gazes. They were originally waiting for the war god to pick their generals. But when they saw that the war god didn't move, they didn't dare to look. But there were still some brave ones who carefully spoke to their comrades. "What's going on? Is the war god not letting us fight?" "Quiet, it's forbidden to make noise in the camp." The moment the soldiers below moved, the regiment commander standing at the front of the group immediately stopped them. A few battalion commanders also cooperated and persuaded the soldiers below, suppressing the discussion. The various divisions and regiments were all like this. Yang Chendong saw this from the corner of his eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. The results of last night's discussion were pretty good. At least the regimental commanders understood his intentions. With their suppression, the army probably wouldn't fall into chaos, but their morale would definitely drop. But this was something that couldn't be helped. The difference in numbers was too great. In order to launch the final attack, they couldn't afford to lose any of their forces. Speaking of which, last night, Yang Chendong had already thought of a countermeasure for Fan Yuhai. If the two sides' roles were reversed, he would have at least two paths to take. The first was to use the strength of the army and use the advantage of numbers to launch a fierce attack. For example, he could directly send 30,000 soldiers and then send 10,000 soldiers behind to launch an all-out attack, using the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy. In the face of tens of thousands of enemy cavalry, even the strength of a flintlock was limited. Once they charged over, the effect of the flintlocks would be limited and it would be difficult to win this battle. Of course, if he decided to do this, he would have to pay a heavy price. From this point of view, the possibility of Fan Yuhai's choice was relatively low. After all, he only had 15,000 men under his command. He could wipe out his own army, but if he really wiped out the cavalry of the Sud Khan, the Khan would definitely not do it. If the first point didn't work, then there was only the second point left. That was to send out a small portion of the army to challenge and slowly nibble away at the strength of the mercenaries. Using small victories to accumulate a big victory, then expanding the results of the battle. The advantage of doing this was that not only would they not lose too much, but they could also continuously reduce the strength of the mercenaries. And when the number of mercenaries was reduced to a certain extent, it would be time to implement the first plan. At that time, if the number of mercenaries was too low, facing tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, they could only run. These were the two methods that Yang Chendong thought of for Fan Yuhai. Looking at it now, the other party had indeed thought the same and sent out a 1,000-man team to challenge them. A 1,000-man team was naturally not scary. Yang Chendong could casually send out a commander or even a battalion commander to lead a 1,000-man team. With the sharpness of the arrows and the sharpness of the cavalry swords, they could win. But this kind of victory was impossible without paying a price. If 100 men died in one battle, then 1,000 men would have to pay 10 times the price. As time passed, the mercenaries would definitely be the first to be unable to bear it. Not to mention, in a 10,000-man team, there were only a few veterans. Once the battle was over, their effective fighting strength would be worn out by the challenges one after another. How would they have any strength left to launch an all-out attack? Thus, the best way to deal with this kind of challenge was to ignore it and act as if he didn't see it. And with the huge range of the firearms, the other party would naturally be helpless. The only drawback was that, in the long run, the morale of the soldiers would definitely take a big hit. This was the biggest test for the mercenaries. Seeing through the other party's intentions, Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't let them succeed. Thus, there was the current strategy of not moving to deal with the changes. Zamubala, who was 1,000 meters away, had already prepared himself for a battle. However, when he realized that there was no movement from the other party after half a day, he thought of Fan Yuhai's instructions and immediately started cursing. He cursed and scolded, calling him a coward, a pussy, and so on. In the end, it was all kinds of insults. What was even more impressive was that Fan Yuhai seemed to have been prepared for this. He even found a cavalryman who could speak Mandarin. While cursing in Mongolian, he also spoke Mandarin. When his voice echoed throughout the land, one could imagine how ugly the mercenaries' expressions were. Battalion Commander, I request to fight. Battalion Commander, I also request to fight. Even if I die on the battlefield, I can't let them humiliate us like this. Yes, we request to fight. Under the scolding, some of the more impulsive soldiers couldn't hold it in anymore. Their faces turned red as they shouted with a belly full of anger. All of you, shut up. All the battalion commanders had been called by their regiment commander for a meeting last night. Naturally, they knew what to do. Although they were also very angry in the face of such a situation and even wanted to rush forward with their swords, they couldn't go against military orders. They could only obey. With the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, although many of the soldiers were a little emotional, it didn't cause any chaos. Under the scolding, many of the soldiers had no choice but to shut up. But from their angry faces, they only obeyed the orders and didn't understand it in their hearts. After a round of scolding, Zamubala retreated with some disappointment. In return, an unknown young general appeared with 1,000 men. They still had the appearance of a challenge. After not getting a reply for a long time, a new round of scolding began. Naturally, it attracted a wave of dissatisfaction from the warriors and their requests for battle. Just like that, the cycle repeated again and again. The dissatisfaction of the mercenaries grew stronger and stronger. However, under the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, no one dared to go against military orders. But at this moment, the morale of the soldiers had started to drop, and it continued to drop. The sky was finally turning dark, and the Mongol cavalry also started to retreat. One by one, they retreated back into the city. The mercenaries also started to set up camp. Hot meals were sent to the soldiers, but for some reason, most of them did not have any appetite. It was obvious that everything that happened today had made them very depressed, and they were very stifled by their anger. At night, after the soldiers went into their tents to rest, some of the battalion commanders finally couldn't take it anymore and stood up. They went in front of their regiment commander and asked for instructions on what to do next. There were also some battalion commanders who expressed their worries. Based on their thoughts, could they ask for instructions from the war god to fight a few battles tomorrow? If not, the morale of the soldiers would drop too quickly and it wouldn't be easy to lead the troops. The oil lamp in Yang Chendong's main tent was still lit. Yang Chendong closed his eyes and wore a large cloak as he sat on a chair beside the stove. But even until dawn, he didn't see any regiment commander come forward to request to fight. Chapter 833. When the sky started to brighten, Yang Chendong, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He then chuckled and muttered to himself, "Not bad, not bad." Tiger's Mane and the other commanders did not come to complain to him. This proved that they could still control the army. Just based on this point, he was not disappointed. But after laughing, Yang Chundong looked outside the tent that was already bright and couldn't help but shake his head. Today is also a difficult day. Just as they had expected, after both sides got into formation again, the Mongolian cavalry's challenge began again. Just like yesterday, there were still groups of 1,000 men walking out. They were shouting and cursing, and all sorts of insults were thrown out. Those insults were as unpleasant as they could be, and once again, it caused the soldiers below to angrily rebuke and request for a fight. In fact, it was even louder than yesterday. Left with no choice, the battalion commanders had to order a few of the shouting soldiers to be captured and brought into the tent. Only then did they suppress the soldiers' anger. However, anyone could tell that this was just a stopgap measure and not the final solution to the problem. On the contrary, if they captured too many of these people, the ones left would probably be a bunch of weaklings. If these soldiers were to be used as the main force to kill the enemy, their might would be weakened by 30%. Below the city walls, Fan Yuhai looked at all of this with great interest. He was in a good mood. In this battle, the mercenaries had too obvious a weakness, and that was that they had too few soldiers. After finding this weakness, he used the tactic of 1,000-men battle in order to continuously grind the enemy's military strength. Once the enemy's military strength was reduced by half, it would be time for him to attack. He never thought that the mercenaries would be so tolerant. This was indeed out of Fan Yuhai's expectations, but it also made him very happy. One had to know that not everyone dared to insult the mercenaries in front of them. Since he was able to do so, wasn't it already considered as proving his strength? More importantly, under this kind of cursing, the morale of the mercenaries would definitely drop very quickly. If he did not control it well, it was possible for the army to mutiny. Even if they managed to control the situation by force, as time passed, the morale of the army would drop. Could such an army still win the war? Fan Yuhai was happy to wait. He wanted to see how long the mercenaries could last. As long as they showed any signs of weakness, he would definitely launch a fierce attack. At that time, he would become the first general to defeat the war god. What's the situation in the city? While Fan Yuhai was enjoying the cursing of his own soldiers, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Deputy General Lu Duo beside him. "General, the situation in the city is normal," Lu Duo replied. Then, as if he understood Fan Yuhai's worries, he smiled and said, "General, don't worry. Although the defense of Jiangdu City is very tight, the mercenaries will not have any chance to steal the city." "Yes, I'm not worried about them stealing the city. I'm worried about other things that we don't know about," Fan Yuhai said in a deep voice. Could it be that the mercenaries were here to scare them? Did they want to scare them away and regain their face? Once they couldn't scare them, they could only hold on like this. But this didn't seem like the style of the war god. But if there was another purpose, what could it be? Fan Yuhai couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could do was to complete the task at hand. Send someone to inform Zhang Meng and ask him to pay more attention to the situation in the city. Also, ask him to protect Sudai Khan. We must not give Agadorji any opportunity. Fan Yuhai couldn't think of what else the mercenaries might do. He could only order Lu Duo. What he didn't know was that there was a saying in ancient times to take the head of a general from an army of 10,000. There was also a term in later generations called Operation Decapitation. Operation Decapitation was the real purpose of Yang Chundong this time. The soldiers outside the city were all serving this military goal and mission. As early as when the Wolfang Special Forces was just established, one of the main military tasks that Yang Chundong gave them was to decapitate. The commander was the commander of an army. Once the news was spread, it would completely destroy the other party's command center and will to resist. The image of "to catch bandits, first catch the leader, hit the snake where it hurts" reflected this idea. The elements of Operation Decapitation were speed, accuracy, and cooperation. Even if the number of enemies this time was several times their own, the effect of ordinary means could be too small. Especially with a famous general like Fan Yuhai, it was even more difficult to win with wisdom. Therefore, Operation Decapitation became Yang Chundong's first choice. Compared to the mercenaries who had guns and even cannons, the existence of the Wolfang Special Forces was still very secret. Could even be said that it was not known to outsiders. It was precisely because others didn't know that once it was used, the effect would be greater and it would be easier to succeed. If the other party was a large military camp, the commander would be in a military tent protected by layers of military camps. It would be too difficult to carry out Operation Decapitation. But now the enemy was resting in the city, and there were many civilians in it, which created enough conditions for Operation Decapitation. In the military tent of the same army, Yang Chundong changed his seat in front of the sand table. His eyes were fixed on the area marked with Wanda City, and the frequency of his breathing became much slower. Report! The voice of the first guard Captain Xiuvi suddenly came from outside the door. 6th Young Master, Battalion Commander Su Yunsheng wants to see you. Let him in. Hearing this, Yang Chundong leaned back on the chair. He knew that the conditions that should be prepared were sufficient. The next step was to see the performance of Tai Hu, Baizhua, and others in the city. Fan Yuhai was very careful. Every night before going to bed, he would walk around the city tower to see the army's night deployment. After making sure that nothing would go wrong, he would leave with satisfaction. But he didn't know that Yang Chundong didn't mean to send the army for a night attack at all. His hope was on the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team that had already entered the city. These two teams had limited personnel, only a few dozen people. If they wanted to enter the city, they wouldn't arouse suspicion at all. Although the 4 gates of Wanda City were closed since the sudden appearance of the mercenaries. In fact, Tai Hu and others had already entered the city a few days ago in disguise. Now they were making all kinds of preparations in the city. If words had to be used to describe it, it was like Sun Wukong who got into the belly of Princess Iron Fan and was ready to make a big scene. Even during the war, there was no curfew in Wanda City. They were different from the Great Ming Dynasty. They never had such a saying and consciousness. Therefore, even though the sky was completely dark and it was already midnight, one could still see some shops on the streets lit up by oil lamps. There were also some figures walking back and forth on the streets from time to time. The Drunken Pleasure House was the largest and the best business in the city. It was also the largest brothel in the city. In a private room, the 2 teams of Tai Hu and Baizhua, who had been dressed up, were drinking here. At the same time, they were also discussing tonight's action. Beside them, 2 women wearing revealing clothes and heavy makeup were sleeping. No one would have thought that in a place like this, there would be people who spent money but didn't buy sex. Not to mention that they were on a mission, and not to mention that these 2 women were too ugly to look at. Their military discipline didn't allow them to do this kind of thing when they were on a mission. So the 2 of them didn't even look at the 2 women who had fainted after drinking the knockout drug. Instead, they lowered their voices and made plans for the night. The army has been out for 3 days. This is the deadline that the 6th Young Master set for us. We must act tonight. How are the preparations on your side? Baizhua was half lying on the table. He looked at Tai Hu, who was close by, and asked in a low voice, "Everything is ready." Skinny Monkey and King Kong are watching that kid. Tai Hu narrowed his eyes, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. Even his murderous aura had been completely concealed. The 6th Young Master once said that a real assassin wouldn't reveal a trace of murderous aura. If they couldn't do this, then they were unqualified. Now Tai Hu had entered this realm. Good. Then I'll wait for you to make a move. After Baizhua said this, he poured a cup of wine on himself. Then he walked out of the room with a strong smell of alcohol. At this time, the Drunken Pleasure House was the best time to seek pleasure. Rashly leaving would attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. However, the smell of alcohol was completely different. It was the best cover. After Baizhua left, Tai Hu also stood up. Then he put his right hand to his mouth and whistled. Naturally, people with ulterior motives could hear it. However, for those who were drunk, this sound wouldn't attract the slightest bit of attention. They would only think that a wanton person was doing something rash. After the whistle sounded, in the best private room of the Drunken Pleasure House, a man who was sleeping with 2 women in each arm suddenly felt a chill on his neck. Then, a piercing chill rose from his heart. Instinctively, he reached out to grab the dagger under his pillow. Hala, if you're a young master, why struggle? You should know that since I've come here, I naturally won't give you any chance. A skinny man who only weighed about 80 kilograms chuckled, revealing a harmless smile. However, if one looked carefully, it wouldn't be difficult to see that there was a hidden killing intent under his laughter. The person lying on the bed was Hala compared to Fan Yuhai, who was fighting war god outside the city every day. He was cooped up here every day, enjoying what he thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. However, he didn't expect that someone would suddenly appear in front of him. How did he get in? Why didn't the guards outside notice? Chapter 8:34. Questions popped up in his mind one after another, but at this moment, he couldn't think too much because the dagger on his neck had already pierced his skin. The feeling of blood flowing down his skin was like a worm crawling on his skin. Feeling that his life was in danger, Haliruo's face changed. Compared to other people, he was more afraid of death. Especially after enjoying so much in the world, he was even more afraid of death. He was afraid of losing everything. Brother, don't be impulsive. What do you want? Whether it's money or an official position, I can give it to you. Presumably, you already know my identity. I can satisfy you. Seeing Haliruo's cooperation, Skinny Monkey-like couldn't help but nod. Very good, I like to deal with smart people. Tell me, where is the crude oil in the city, and what's the password for tonight? Crude oil? You? Who are you? Haliruo's face changed greatly. Whether the other party wanted money or an official position, he believed that he could satisfy them. But when it came to crude oil, he had to be careful, because that thing was something that even his father didn't want to provoke. As for the identity of the person who inquired about the crude oil, it seemed like it was about to be revealed. The dagger slid down and suddenly reached the dark fatty's chest. Then it stabbed lightly. Haliruo immediately felt a bone-piercing pain, causing his face to contort in pain. At this moment, the skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. It seems like you still don't understand the situation. Since that's the case, I'll leave a mark on your body. No, I'll tell you everything. Knowing that his life was in the hands of others, Haliruo didn't dare to play any tricks. He hurriedly begged for mercy and told the skinny monkey-like man the location of the crude oil. It's in the warehouse in the west of the city. That used to be the city's granary. Take me to see it. Remember, kid, don't play any tricks. Otherwise, I promise I'll take your life before you can shout. The skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. The warehouse in the west of the city was where the crude oil was located. But without seeing it with their own eyes, they couldn't be at ease. Trembling, Haliruo put on his clothes and opened the door. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 4 guards guarding the door. When they saw the young master walk out, they quickly lowered their heads and saluted. However, when they saw the skinny monkey-like figure, the 4 guards couldn't help but reveal a trace of confusion in their eyes. They had been watching outside the door and didn't see any man enter this room. Where did this person come from? How could they know that one of Skinny Monkey's specialties was the bone shrinkage skill? Although the gap in the window outside the door was not very big, it was enough for him to use his unique skill to enter. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, young master will dig out your eyes. When the skinny monkey-like figure noticed that the 4 guards were looking at him, he glared back fiercely. At the same time, he gently applied some force to the dagger behind Haliruo's waist. Cough, don't look around. She's one of us. Although he could speak freely now, he knew that if he said something he shouldn't say, the first one to fall would be himself. As soon as he said that he was one of them, the 4 guards immediately showed a look of understanding. They lowered their heads slowly with an expression that said, "We understand." Clearly, they had misunderstood and thought that their young master's taste had changed. He no longer liked women but men. Angered by the 4 guards' gazes, Haliruo really wanted to shout, "Your young master doesn't have any other hobbies. Even if he did, he wouldn't like such a skinny man." Of course, he could only think these words in his heart. Shou-ho accompanied the young master and the 4 guards as they walked towards the entrance of the drunken pleasure house. Along the way, many girls greeted him warmly, but because he had something on his mind, he did not reply to any of them. Haliruo only had one question in his mind. When he left the door, there would be 6 more guards. At that time, would they be able to turn around and attack him? Haliruo couldn't guess if these people would kill him after achieving their goal. So if there was a chance, he would definitely give it a try. And this thought disappeared as soon as he walked out of the door and met up with the 6 guards at a street corner. Not for other reasons, but because of the sudden appearance of 3 strangers. The short blades in their hands danced, and in a few moments, the seemingly tall and strong guards were all killed on the ground. And the other side only had 4 people, including Skinny Monkey. The 10 guards didn't even have time to figure out what had happened, and all of them died from fatal injuries. All of this fell into Haliruo's eyes. He immediately said in horror, You just want to look at the oil, not kill people, right? Of course not. The skinny monkey-like man chuckled. If you're obedient, I won't kill you. I can assure you that I won't kill you. All right, now that there are no more annoying flies, we can go. The 10 corpses were thrown into an inconspicuous corner in the darkness. Haliruo, with 4 guards following behind him, headed straight for the warehouse in the west of the city. Along the way, the soldiers sent by Fan Yuhai and his father, Agar Dorji, were all taken care of one by one. Perhaps they thought that they were hiding very well, but in front of the well-trained and inhumane Wolf Fong members, their every move was magnified like a magnifying glass. As they made their way to the warehouse in the west of the city, Haliruo was still waiting for something to happen. He knew that his father had secretly arranged for people to follow him. As soon as they appeared, he would seize the opportunity to escape. But unfortunately, the journey was incomparably peaceful. He even saw 2 groups of Mongolian cavalry patrolling the streets. Haliruo, who cherished his life, didn't have the courage to shout out. Since Skinny Monkey had sworn an oath to longevity heaven, he had no choice but to believe him. It had to be said that Wolf Fong had chosen the right person. A person who was extremely afraid of death would definitely not play around with his life. Just like that, the 5 of them successfully arrived at the warehouse. From afar, they could see a group of about 100 Mongolian soldiers guarding the place. When they saw someone approaching from afar, one of them shouted loudly, "Who are you? Leave immediately." Haliruo was clearly startled by this shout and his footsteps came to a halt. At this moment, a dagger was poked at his waist. Skinny Monkey's devilish voice sounded out again. "What are you afraid of? Have you forgotten your identity?" Haliruo, who was originally covered in a layer of cold sweat, finally remembered who he was. From the moment he was threatened until now, he found that his courage was becoming smaller and smaller. After being reminded by Skinny Monkey, his heroic spirit rose and he took large strides forward. At the same time, he shouted, "Who are you? You don't even recognize your family's young master?" As he walked closer and closer to the warehouse, the guard saw that it was Haliruo and his 4 guards. He couldn't help but straighten his body. "So it's young master. But I don't know what you're doing here so late at night." I'm following my father's orders to get some oil." Haliruo followed Skinny Monkey's instructions and walked towards the warehouse with his hands behind his back. Password. Seeing that they were about to enter the warehouse, a Mongolian soldier followed the rules and blocked Haliruo's path. "You dare to block me?" Haliruo pretended to be very angry and roared. "Have you forgotten that your master, Fan Yuhai, was once my father's subordinate?" Of course, these words were a bit too big. They were just temporarily treating Agadorji as their leader. Of course, no one would mention this matter at this time. Seeing that Haliruo was angry, the guard hurried over. Young master, don't lower yourself to the same level as this servant. He doesn't know your identity, haha." "He doesn't know, but you do. Isn't it enough that I'm standing here alone? Can't I go in and take a look?" Haliruo put on a demonic expression as he looked at the guard general. He looked like he would fly into a rage at any moment and even start beating people up. Haliruo's reputation in the army was naturally not good. He didn't have much ability, but he was arrogant and had a bad temper. However, he had a good father. If he really provoked him and beat him up here, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to say anything even if he was in the right. The guard naturally understood this logic. He wouldn't go against his young master because of a password. He immediately smiled apologetically. "Young master, of course I know you. It's just that if you want oil you can't go in?" And Haliruo thought that the guard was being tactful. However, after hearing his reply, it was clear that this wasn't the case. Haliruo's face fell. Young master, don't be angry. I'm not stopping you. I'm just telling you that there's no more oil inside. It's all been moved away." The guard came forward and said softly, "Moved away? Why didn't I know about this?" Haliruo's face was filled with shock. This wasn't an act. He really didn't know. Oh, this was an order from General Fan. Not long after the sky turned dark, the oil was moved away. The guard naturally couldn't say that this was a secret order from Fan Yuhai. If he said that, it would seem that Fan Yuhai didn't trust Agadorji and his son. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Chapter 835. Even without the general's explanation, Haraluo understood what he meant. When he thought about how he had to hide such an important matter from his father and himself, he couldn't help but feel angry. Good. This Fan Yuhai is getting more and more arrogant. Humph. Let's see if I don't find trouble with him tomorrow. Fine, I'll tell you where the kerosene was moved, and this matter will have nothing to do with you. He pretended to be very angry as he spoke, his saliva dripping from his mouth. His gaze landed on the defending general. But when he looked over, he saw the general's hesitant expression. He said angrily, "What, are you trying to hide it from me? Or was the kerosene not moved at all? You were lying to me all along." "Ah, I wouldn't dare. Originally, the general really didn't want to say anything. After all, the kerosene was moved in secret, and he didn't want more people to know. But since Haraluo had said so, if he didn't tell him the truth, he would really offend him. Helpless, he took a step forward and carefully set a place. "Oh, so it's there." Haraluo nodded in surprise, then looked at the general and said, "Fine, I'll believe you for now. If you're lying, don't blame me for taking care of you." I wouldn't dare. But young master, I'll have to trouble you not to tell anyone that I told you this. Otherwise, I'm afraid General Fan will beat me up." As he spoke, the general cupped his hands and begged for mercy. "Don't worry, I won't say that you told me. I'll just say that I found it myself. All right, I'm leaving." Haraluo turned and left with Shouho and the other 4 guards. The general couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. This little ancestor was finally gone. Haraluo's group of 5 quickly left the warehouse. When there was no one around, Shouho immediately asked, "Speak. Where was the kerosene moved to?" At this moment, Haraluo no longer looked as imposing as before. Instead, he looked like he was begging for mercy. "I can tell you, but can you promise to spare my life?" "Of course, as long as we see the kerosene, I won't kill you. I've already sworn." Skinny Monkey chuckled. Haraluo let out a sigh of relief at the thought of an oath. "The kerosene has been moved to a ruined temple in the south of the city. I'll take you there now." Fan Yuhai had once used fire to burn down the mercenary army and obtained a great victory. However, he also knew that this thing was a double-edged sword. Could hurt others, but it could also hurt him. Therefore, the location of the kerosene was constantly changing. Apart from the soldiers guarding the kerosene, no one else knew where it had gone. Originally, this was to prevent the mercenaries from setting the place on fire, but unexpectedly, the mercenaries still found the place. Taihu was indeed very careful. Although he thought that the warehouse might be where the kerosene was stored, he didn't dare to fully believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Who would have thought that he was right to be careful? Not long after, Haraluo brought Skinny Monkey and the others to the ruined temple. There was indeed a group of Mongol soldiers guarding the place, but they were all hidden in the shadows. If Haraluo didn't appear here, they wouldn't have come out so easily. However, no matter where it was proven that Haraluo's name was strong enough. Perhaps this also proved that the Mongol army's management was flawed. In any case, no one dared to offend him. They allowed him to enter the temple and take some oil before leaving in satisfaction. Inside the temple, Skinny Monkey saw over 100 barrels of oil placed here. After a certain distance, he revealed his original appearance. "All right, I'll leave this place to you guys. I'm going to report the situation to Tigerhead. See you later." After saying that, Skinny Monkey quickly left. Haraluo wanted to stop him, but another tall guard, nicknamed King Kong, stepped forward and blocked his way. "Kid, are you ready?" King Kong sneered as he played with a sharp dagger in his hand. Sensing danger, Haraluo's face turned pale. What are you doing?" "He said he wouldn't kill me just now." "That's right, he won't kill you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left so quickly." "But I didn't say I wouldn't kill you, did I?" King Kong was still smiling, but the killing intent on his face was getting heavier and heavier. At this moment, his killing intent was revealed. He couldn't wait any longer. This person in front of him had caused trouble for the 6th young master more than once. In Wolf Fang's eyes, such a person deserved to die. You're despicable." Seeing that they were about to hit him while he was down, Haraluo wanted to shout. Even if he died, he wanted to make some noise and attract attention. Unfortunately, his reaction was still a little too slow. The moment he opened his mouth, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, all the strength in his body seemed to have been sucked out at this moment. With a face full of depression and regret, he ended his life just like that. Haraluo was dead. After his death, Skinny Monkey quickly returned to the drunken pleasure house. He found Tai Hu and reported the new situation. He thought that it was a close call. Fortunately, he went to take a look. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have made a big mistake. "I already know what happened. Inform the brothers to stay away from the ruined temple and hide. Also, inform Captain Baizhua and the others that we will begin the operation in half an hour." The cold wind whistled. Although it was spring, the early spring in the grasslands was still very cold at night. Yang Qindong, who had just taken a nap, was woken up by the radio operator, Wang Shan. After reading the contents of the telegram, he laughed coldly and said, "Good, Tai Hu and the others have done a great service. How about this? Immediately call Tiger's Mane and all the other commanders over for a meeting." In the middle of the night, the mercenary camp started to get busy. One by one, the commanders walked into their tents with faces full of suspicion. When they came out again, their faces were filled with excitement. Not long after, the entire camp started to move. However, this time, no one blew the whistle. The soldiers in their tents were all quietly woken up. The movements of the mercenary camp did not attract the attention of the enemy. This was also due to the tyrannical style of the reconnaissance unit. In order to ensure that they would not be attacked, they would usually place their sentries far away. Slowly, the Mongolian army had gotten used to it. Since they had no intention of attacking the camp, they retreated further and further, losing the ability to observe the movements of the mercenary camp at night. The half-hour was about to pass. The various regiments and various ranks of soldiers walked out. They mounted their horses and held their blades. They were densely packed and waited in the cold wind. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunsheng, appeared again. Following Yang Qindong's shout, 2 100mm regimental mortar-caliber mortars were delivered in front of everyone. In order to deliver the 2 cannons, Su Yunsheng had personally escorted them. They had arrived 3 days later than the army, but it had to be said that the timing was perfect. "Get ready." Looking at the 2 black cannons, which gave off a chilling feeling, Yang Qindong lightly nodded his head towards Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao. These 2 captains had often followed him to test the cannons. Before he had an official artillery unit, they could be considered as qualified candidates. According to the target coordinates that they had obtained before, the 2 cannons were adjusted to the best position after being verified. Then, 2 shells were loaded into the barrels of the cannons. After that, the 2 captains turned their attention back to Yang Qindong. He took a deep breath. For tonight's counterattack, he had waited for 3 days. Of those 3 days, he had allowed the other party to insult and abuse him. Now everything was about to end. From the time when Tiger's Mane and the others were burned to ashes to this time, Only 11 days had passed. He was about to get his revenge. Fire! Under the gazes of all the soldiers, Yang Qindong's shout rang out. Following that, two intense and dazzling flames soared into the sky. They flew straight towards the ruined temple in Wanda City, which was tens of li away. The cannonballs flew across the night sky like shooting stars. This scene was seen by some of the Mongolian cavalry who were guarding the city. However, before they could react, two loud explosions rang out in their ears. Then, flames soared into the sky. Following that, explosions rang out one after another. The cannons bombarded the oil, causing a chain reaction. Flames soared into the sky and explosions rang out incessantly. Looking at this scene, Yang Qindong raised his hand and shouted, "Blow the bugle call. Everyone, charge! Charge!" The more than 10,000 mercenary cavalrymen couldn't wait any longer. With loud shouts, they galloped forward on their horses and charged straight ahead. The two remaining mortars adjusted their angles and aimed at the south gate of Wanda City and continued to fire. They wanted to clear a path for the mercenary soldiers. In the city, the loud explosions sounded like an earthquake. Khan Sud immediately put on his coat and rushed out of his room. He stared at the ruined temple in disbelief. His eyes widened as he thought to himself, "It's over, it's over." However, something even more frightening happened. Just as he was standing in front of the door and lamenting, a small flame suddenly flashed and entered his chest. The powerful recoil directly knocked Khan Sud to the ground. This sudden, unforeseen event attracted the loud shouts of several of the soldiers around him. The decapitation operation had begun. At this moment, it wasn't just this place. Gunshots rang out from several enemy generals' residences. The phantom members who had been lying in ambush for a long time fully displayed their strengths, firing bullet after bullet into the chests of the targets they had long imprinted in their hearts. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.